In the summer of 1988, 27-year-old Deborah Honeywell was at a crossroads. After ending a relationship with the father of her infant daughter, the Orlando, Florida native was ready for a change.
I was very much in love with my daughter's father, but it just didn't work out. So I felt very depressed, very hurt, very insecure.
So when her brother in West Palm Beach offered to have her work at his fireworks business for a few weeks, Deborah jumped at the chance.
I was in a floral business, but during the summertime, it slows down dramatically. My brother said he needed help, and I thought it was good that I got away from my daughter's father for a little while.
But just a few days after arriving, Deborah couldn't help noticing one of her new co-workers, Scott Erskine.
He was at my brother's house. He had come in. Scott was a very good-looking man. When he smiled, he reminded me of the Tom Cruise look.
The 25-year-old seemed quite taken with Deborah, too, as he laid on the charm.
There was a lot of flirting.
Let's go get together.
He gave me all kinds of attention, and it took my mind off of my daughter's father.
When the summer ended, so did their brief one-month fling. Deborah let Scott down gently and prepared to head back home to reopen her floral business. But Scott wasn't about to give up so easily.
Scott followed me back to Orlando, and he pulled up right behind me. I felt like he was disrespecting me.
I told you, I can't do this, okay?
But I thought it was more like puppy love. He got attached, and he didn't want to let go.
Scott left immediately, and Deborah didn't hear from him for weeks, until she received an unexpected phone call.
I had gotten a call from a nurse at a hospital, and she claimed that he was walking down the street and had collapsed.
Hey, is he all right?
Scott got on the phone.
Are you okay?
Well, no.
And said he had a broken neck in the past, and that he had a wire in his neck and it re-broke. I was like, you know, a person doesn't survive this.
With no one else to turn to, Scott pleaded with Deborah to let him stay with her as he recovered. She relented, but not before doing a little homework.
The hospital wouldn't release him unless somebody picked him up. I felt kind of sorry for him, basically. But I was concerned with my daughter in the house, so I went to the police department and did a background check on him. And he came up clean.
That September, Scott moved in with Deborah. And to her surprise, he was a welcome source of company.
They put a halo vest on him, and that was a little devastating to see, but he was helping me out in my business. We were becoming closer, and he was just great with my daughter. Scott made me feel wanted, secure. I really started to fall in love with him.
Debbie seemed excited about Scott. Her happiness level instantly rose, and she seemed to be much more motivated to start going on with her life.
When the halo vest finally came off, Deborah was thrilled when Scott surprised her with a marriage proposal.
It was perfect. I felt so secure about my feelings for him, for his feelings for me, so I said yes.
Then, just 2 months later, Deborah had a surprise for Scott.
I'm pregnant.
Really?
I didn't know if I was so ready for that, but he was thrilled.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
The couple decided to tie the knot quickly, and a few weeks later, Deborah was escorted down the aisle and into the arms of her beloved.
It was absolutely gorgeous. Everything seemed picture perfect.
She was very happy, super excited. They looked like a very happy couple.
I thought everything was going good. You know, I was gonna have that secure relationship that I've always wanted.
But before long, Deborah and others would find themselves forced into unimaginable darkness as Scott revealed the evil within.
I can't believe a man's capable of that.
I just thought, oh my God, I was scared to death.
In the winter of 1989, Deborah Erskine and her new husband Scott were preparing for the birth of their first child.
We went into our typical everyday life, pretty much right away. Everything was going good.
But just a few weeks into their marriage, Deborah began noticing subtle changes in Scott's behavior.
I didn't like him smoking, and he insisted on smoking in the house. And he definitely started drinking more.
Please don't smoke in the house.
When I confronted him about it, he said, "Get off my back, I can do what I want."
This is my house. I make the rules.
While he'd once complimented Deborah, Scott was now quick to cut her down.
Man, you got that.
What? I'm pregnant, not fat.
Debbie told me those things, and I feared that Debbie was going to be let down again, hurt again, and be stuck with 2 children now.
Deborah couldn't understand what was happening to her husband. Then, less than a month later, Deborah came home after grocery shopping and immediately sensed that something was wrong.
I normally keep the curtains open, and I noticed the curtains were closed.
It's too dark in here.
It's not too dark. I want them closed. Don't tell me what to do.
So I walked into the bedroom,
Come back here.
and Scott was right behind me, and he pushed me on the bed. He wrapped his hands around my neck, and I started trying to fight him off. He kept choking me, and the more I fought him, the more he pressed down on my neck.
I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you.
The look in his eyes was just a look that you never forget. And as I'm trying to get away from him, he kicked me in the stomach. When he kicked me, I knew there was something wrong with the baby.
With her own life and the life of their unborn child at stake, Deborah made a desperate attempt to get away.
My family lived in the same subdivision. I needed to get out of there and get to their house. I don't even know how I got away.
Deborah ran out of the house screaming, unaware that Scott was only moments behind her.
I really thought he's gonna kill me.
She was gasping for air. So he's coming to kill us all.
In the spring of 1989, Deborah Erskine was 5 months pregnant and running for her life from her husband, Scott.
I was running as hard as I could to get away from him. And I got to my family's house.
The front door flies open, and Debbie falls halfway in, and she's gasping for air. And I ran over to pick her up, and she managed to get the words out. He's coming to kill us all.
He's coming to kill us!
And Scott drove up right after I got there.
He's trying to kill me!
And then Vance went out the door.
All I knew is I just wanted to get my hands on him. I opened the door to the van, and I took the back of his head and I started smashing it. By this time, 6 neighbors are on the sidewalk. Everybody's calling 911. I felt like I was defending my family for their lives.
Within minutes, police were on the scene. Fearing repercussions, neither Scott nor Vance pressed charges against each other. Once Scott gave his statement, he took off,
He's trying to kill me!
leaving Deborah to take action.
Best thing you can do at this point is get a restraining order.
I wanted to press charges. I had told him what he did, But they were saying basically it was a he said, she said.
Just don't have you in our witnesses. It's crime.
So it would be better if I got a restraining order and have him served, because the restraining order would make him leave the house.
But there were more immediate concerns.
I knew something was seriously wrong with the baby.
Deborah's sister rushed her to the nearest hospital.
When I got to the hospital, they said I dilated 2 centimeters. And they gave me 3 choices: either be prepared for him to be mentally retarded, have an abortion, or I can keep him and take a chance and hope for the best. I knew in my heart of hearts that I needed to take that chance.
Deborah was released from the hospital and immediately filed a restraining order against Scott. But when she returned home, Scott was waiting.
What are you doing here? You have to leave.
He decided to leave. I was scared to death. I didn't know where he was going, and I didn't care where he was going.
Then on September 24th, Deborah finally went into labor and delivered a healthy baby boy, Brandon.
He had all his limbs, his feet, his hands, his toes. I was so happy.
Once back on her feet, Deborah promptly filed for divorce, and Scott didn't fight it.
The marriage was done. It was over. And I got sole custody of Brandon. But I always had that fear in the back of my mind, with Scott showing up.
And for 4 years, Deborah didn't hear a word from or about Scott. Life was finally starting to feel normal again, when in the fall of 1993, she got an unexpected call from a detective in San Diego, California.
They told me that Scott was in jail. He was arrested for rape. I was in such disbelief.
Just a few days earlier in San Diego, Scott picked up a woman at a bus stop near his home.
Scott invited her up. He then held her captive for about 4 hours, sadistically raping her.
She was able to talk him into letting her go. And of course, she went and she reported to the authorities.
By March 3rd, 1994, Scott Erskine was found guilty of 10 charges, including rape, and pled guilty to possession of a deadly weapon.
I knew he was a lot of things. He was capable, like I said, the look in that eye.
Scott Erskine was sentenced to 70 years in prison, and as all prisoners in California, was forced to give a sample of his blood for DNA purposes.
I was relieved that I didn't have to worry about him anymore. I felt safe at that point.
But little did Deborah know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Scott was more evil than she could have ever imagined. The years passed, and by the summer of 2002, Deborah was happily raising her 15-year-old daughter and her son Brandon, now 12.
My childhood was amazing because I had everything I needed. There was no reason to ask about my father. And everything about my father was a secret.
But secrets have a way of coming out, and the whole horrible truth about Brandon's father was about to be exposed.
I got a phone call from a detective saying that they needed to come and talk to me right away about Scott. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Scott escaped.
Scott Erskine?
As soon as I heard Scott Erskine, that caught my attention immediately. I knew my dad's name.
So, of course, I agreed for him to come there.
I need you to finish your homework in your bedroom.
I sent the kids in the back room because I didn't want Brandon to be involved in that conversation.
I wanted to listen because I knew she was talking or referring to my father.
And when the detective arrived, Deborah sat in stunned silence as he unleashed a story of undeniable horror.
There's evil inside of him.
I just broke down in tears, just immediately.
I was like in shock. What he did was just unspeakable.
In the summer of 2002, Deborah Erskine sat in dismay as a detective from San Diego told her a horrific story about her ex-husband, Scott.
He started to explain why he was there. They were investigating a cold case concerning 2 boys that were murdered in San Diego.
March 29th, 1993, we got a call to report to the bodies of 2 young boys found. There was evidence that they were tortured. There was evidence of molestation. And they were strangled.
Forensics were able to find cigarette butts, which they were able to extract DNA from. But back in '93, DNA testing was much more complicated and you needed more of the sample. They didn't have a lot of sample, so they waited.
Several years later, with advances in DNA, investigators decided to retest the sample.
We got a hit with an individual by the name of Scott Erskine.
DNA from Scott's 1993 San Diego rape case matched the DNA left at the scene of the 2 murdered boys. And if that wasn't enough, authorities suspected Scott was responsible for another murder in West Palm Beach during the summer of 1989.
There was a woman whose body had been found. She was raped and murdered. They also found a cigarette butt at the scene. They were able to get a DNA sample from that, and it matched Erskine's sample.
When the detective told me the dates that this person was murdered in West Palm Beach, I knew it happened right at the time that he choked me.
I'll kill you!
The first thought that went through my mind was, that could have been me. It's so surreal. I didn't think it could really happen to me. Never in a million years would I think that I was married to a serial killer.
And just when things seemed they couldn't get any worse, Deborah's son Brandon appeared from behind the corner.
I walked out into the living room and I told her, I was like, I heard everything. I just broke down in tears, just immediately.
This is what my father did, and what does that make me?
I just started crying my eyes out and just hugging him.
As the San Diego prosecutor prepared his case against Scott, more details of his violent history came to light. In 1980, when Scott was just 17 years old, he attacked a 14-year-old boy.
Erskine had done a job as a youth counselor when he saw this boy and attacked him, beat him severely, sexually molested him.
Unbelievably, Scott served only 4 years before he was released in 1984. Just 4 years before moving to Florida and meeting Deborah.
I was in shock. All I can do is reflect back to when I did the background check. And nothing came up. And I kept thinking, why did nothing come up?
When Deborah met Scott, his previous crime had been committed in California and was not reported to Florida authorities.
You have California and Florida. And back in those days, you know, there was not that connection.
In September 2003, Scott Erskine went to trial in San Diego for the murders of the 2 boys. He was found guilty and sentenced to death in June 2004. 2 months later, Scott pled guilty to the murder of the woman in West Palm Beach and received a life sentence.
He's gonna have to answer for what he's done. He's gonna definitely have to answer to God on this one.
What he did is just unspeakable. Somebody like that doesn't deserve to be living.
Today, Deborah remains grateful she escaped Scott's monstrous clutches.
I really believe my family saved us. Had my family not been there, I believe I would be dead, and my son would be dead.
With her daughter now on her own, Deborah continues to focus on Brandon.
It took a long time, but Brandon's doing good. And he's left the thought of his father.
I literally stopped thinking of him. So that way it's not painful when he is dead. Because I don't want to know when he's dead. Just let it happen.
This is a new journey for the two of us. And I'm very excited for that new journey to start.
In the fall of 1980, 19-year-old Rob Wedby was focused on his career as he attended college in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Well, I was actually studying to be in the insurance business. I worked in the family-owned business. It seemed like a good place to start for me.
But when he and a friend cruised the campus strip one night, insurance was the last thing on Rob's mind.
My buddy and I were looking for dates. We pulled up to a red light, and there was a couple of girls that pulled up next to us, and they were trying to get our attention. So we pulled over, and the girl in the passenger seat, I heard her say, "I get the driver." I thought she was a cute girl.
The young blonde introduced herself as 17-year-old Lisa Outlaw. As the two chatted, Rob found himself impressed by more than Lisa's good looks.
She was sports-oriented. We talked about football and boxing. I liked that. It gave us something in common to talk about.
Can you give me my number?
She wrote her number down, asked me to call her. I was glad that she did it.
I'd love to see you guys sometime. Call me.
1 week later, Rob invited Lisa on a picnic lunch and soon realized Lisa's surname matched her slightly rebellious streak.
Lisa's family was of modest means. Seemed like there was a little bit of tension there.
I got away to Memphis. I hitchhiked.
She really wanted to get out of her home.
As the pair began dating exclusively over the next year, Rob did his best to keep Lisa distracted from her home life.
Lisa enjoyed material things, and he was happy to be able to give her these gifts and see the look on her face when she got it. It meant a lot to him.
But by the fall of 1981, Lisa started dropping not-so-subtle hints that she was ready to take the next step.
Lisa wanted to get married, and I wanted to live together for a while first. But she said she wouldn't do that. If I wanted to do that, we had to get married.
Rob was torn, but he wouldn't have to waffle on a decision for long.
So I get a call from her one day, and her tone is rather upset. She said, "I'm pregnant."
I don't know what to do.
It scared the hell out of me, to be real honest about it.
Pregnant? Really?
It was quite a shock. I thought, well, we're going to get married and raise this child together. Lisa was extremely excited. She was walking on water.
But just 2 months into wedding planning, Lisa casually dropped a devastating bombshell.
Lisa said, "So I've been meaning to tell you I'm not pregnant. I found out the other day."
What? I made a mistake.
Probably could have knocked me over with a feather. And it was no big deal to her. It was very confusing. But I didn't want to go back on my word.
I'm sorry.
So on a warm summer day, Rob married Lisa at his family church as planned.
I felt like I was going to pass out. I wanted to run out of there.
Rob was getting more and more nervous, but I remember saying it's going to be just fine.
It was kind of stressful that day, but it turned out nice. They were the perfect couple.
3 years later, life only got better for the couple when they discovered Lisa was pregnant again and successfully delivered a healthy baby boy.
Everybody was just bouncing off the walls, ecstatic.
They seemed to be the picture-perfect storybook ending happy family.
But this young family's perfect world would take a devastating turn when Rob's beautiful bride did the unimaginable.
She was like a black widow.
Lisa would do anything to get what she wanted.
I never thought she was capable of anything close to that. I didn't even recognize her.
In the summer of 1989, Rob Wedby and his wife Lisa were happily raising their son Justin when they learned they were expecting again, this time with a little girl.
Lisa was happy. She was pretty excited, pretty giddy. Everyone was on cloud nine.
But 9 months later, when Lisa delivered baby Brittany, smiles of joy were suddenly replaced with concerned whispers.
The doctor said, I have some bad news for you.
Unfortunately, the news is not good.
Brittany has Down syndrome. I don't wish that news on my worst enemy.
I was at the office and the clerk said, Rob's on the phone, for you. He said, well, we were just told that we have a Downs baby. It was just devastating.
But Rob's feelings were quickly overshadowed by Lisa's reaction.
Lisa came unglued. Just absolutely went berserk.
It's your fault.
It shocked me. She was a level of upset that I don't recall ever seeing.
As expected, the first few months with Brittany at home were not easy.
Lisa had led a perfect life, and Brittany's birth changed all that. I don't think she was mentally nor emotionally prepared to handle that.
Soon, Lisa began spending more time at their local church.
Lisa got more and more active in the choir and stayed long after choir practice was over. So I took over a lot of the responsibilities for feeding and taking care of Brittany.
Still, Rob was surprised when he started hearing ugly rumors that Lisa was having an affair with the church organist, Michael Frazier.
I confronted Lisa about it, and she said,
I could do a lot better than Michael Frazier.
I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, yeah. So I let it go.
But by April 1994, after 12 years together, it was obvious to Rob that his marriage was in serious trouble.
Lisa brought up the subject of divorce. She said, I made an appointment with the attorney. I was coming to the realization that, well, maybe this is where we're going, even if I don't want to. So I said, I'll just meet you there then. But when I walked in, you would have thought I was Clint Eastwood with a 44 Magnum out.
I'll be right back.
The attorney came out, and she said, I'm going to call 911.
You need to leave now.
So I left, thinking, what in the world?
Later that night, Rob asked Lisa about the odd response.
She said, well, they have a lot of trouble with mad spouses, and that's all I know.
And a month later, as Lisa was still considering divorce, Rob was even more confused by another puzzling incident.
Up the street comes 2 police cars. They pull in my driveway, and they get out, get their hands on their guns. I'm thinking, whoa. And he said, we got a call about a domestic abuse case at 7600. I said, no, this is 7500. You got the wrong house.
When Lisa arrived home moments later, Rob was even more baffled by her reaction.
She just blew it off. She said, well, I guess they had the wrong address. Simple as that.
Don't worry.
So it was very confusing. But by that point, I'm just like, what's next?
Rob didn't have to wait long. A few weeks later, Lisa did an about-face that changed everything.
She said, I've been thinking about it, and maybe we should have at least one more run at it for the sake of the kids. And I was happy to hear that because that's what I wanted to do.
But on June 8th, while Justin was staying with Rob's parents and Brittany was asleep, Rob awoke to a strange feeling.
I was in that sort of la-la land, you know, where you're not sure, is this a dream, is this real? And then I could see the silhouette of an arm, a hand, and a knife in it. I knew, at that point, obviously it's not a dream.
In fact, Rob had just woken up to a real-life nightmare.
I just cannot imagine the level of terror that he must have felt.
Now, there was blood everywhere, and I was screaming for Lisa. I realized that he's not going to let me leave this room alive.
On June 8th, 1994, after reconciling with his wife Lisa, Rob Wedby awoke to his worst nightmare.
Somebody was trying to kill me. I thought it was an intruder, a murderer. He was trying to stab me in the neck. But he missed, and he cut my earlobe pretty much off. That was an oh my God moment.
As blood ran down his neck, Rob struggled for control of the knife.
I got a hold of his wrists and rolled him into the floor and got around behind him. I started calling for Lisa. No answer. The first thing I thought is maybe he has actually killed her first. And then I started worrying about Brittany. So all kinds of things are going through my head.
Just then, the knife-wielding intruder broke free.
I grabbed for his left wrist and I got the knife blade. Cut the base of my thumb down to the artery. That hurt like a son of a gun. It was bleeding profusely. I was getting tired, and I was losing my grip on his wrist because of the blood. I felt like the longer I stayed in that room, the less my chances of survival would be.
Suddenly, Rob looked up and saw what seemed like a vision.
Lisa showed up in the doorway of the bedroom with a baseball bat. My first thought was, all right, she's here to help me. So I'm hollering at Lisa. I said, turn the light on and call the cops. I got him.
Lisa, hit him with the bat.
She just stands there, doesn't react. Then all of a sudden, he chimes in.
Lisa, do it now.
And in an instant, I recognized his voice.
Do it now, Lisa.
I said, I know who this is. This is Michael Frazier. There was a moment where everything came clear, and I knew they were in cahoots.
Lisa! Lisa!
I realized that I had to do something. I'm sweating, my mind's racing, my heart's pounding. So I just stood up with him, raised him over my head as high as I could lift him, and then threw him into the corner. And then I took off. Snatched the bat away from Lisa as I passed her.
Desperate, Rob ran to his neighbor's house and called the police. When investigators arrived, they found Brittany safe in her bed, with no sign of Michael or Lisa. But Rob was astounded by what police would uncover.
Everyone was in shock.
You don't see a case like this every day.
It was just so diabolical. I was completely blown away.
On the morning of June 8, 1994, Rob Wedby stood shaken and bleeding as police searched for his wife Lisa and his attacker, Michael Frazier.
The first officer questioned me, and I told him that Michael Frazier had attacked me in my bed with a knife, and my wife was involved in it. I sustained a severed earlobe and a severed artery and tendon in my thumb.
While Rob was treated for his injuries, police located Lisa at a neighbor's house.
Lisa told us a stranger broke into the home in the middle of the night and attacked the sleeping couple. But we couldn't substantiate any injuries she had suffered. She was very emotionless about it. Lisa had all the signs of deception.
After several hours of interrogation, Lisa finally cracked.
I let Michael in.
Lisa admitted to knowing Frazier and letting Frazier into the house at around 8 o'clock. Lisa hid him in the downstairs closet, and she waited on the couch for Frazier to come out and kill her husband.
Lisa Wedby was arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Meanwhile, police located Michael Frazier at his home and arrested him with the same charges.
When they hauled her off to jail and they hauled him off to jail, I was in shock. I never thought she was capable of anything close to that.
As Rob's injuries healed, he began to look back at the strange events over the past several months.
Everything came clear as to what was going on. Lisa was having an affair with Michael.
Lisa filed to get a protective order on the grounds that Rob was abusing her.
That explained the crazy incident when I went up to the attorney's office. I think she had told them that, I had threatened her.
Then there was the mysterious domestic abuse call that sent police to Rob's home.
Lisa had convinced Michael that she was a victim of domestic violence.
I think Michael Frazier made the fraudulent 911 call to set me up. Problem is, Lisa hadn't gotten home before he made the call, and he told police the wrong address.
Since their plans were failing every step of the way, the adulterous schemers turned to murder.
If Rob Whitby had been killed, Lisa would stand to inherit the house, the property, all the money from any insurance policies, above $1 million. She would have gained not only her freedom, but financial freedom.
I was disgusted. It is hard to believe that, someone that you've been married to, have children with, could actually be that cold.
In September 1995, Michael Frazier was convicted of attempting to commit voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison.
I was very disappointed in the verdict. I believe he committed attempted first-degree murder because there was premeditation.
I think he was manipulated by this woman. She apparently was able to convince him that she was in danger, and Rob Whitby had to be killed for her to be safe. But he stood to come away with quite a bit of money and a beautiful companion.
On June 24, 1996, Lisa Wedby pled guilty to solicitation for murder to avoid a potential 25-year prison sentence. Unbelievably, she received only 1 year in jail, followed by 3 years of probation.
In my opinion, to do the things that Lisa was contemplating, she got no sentence. She did virtually no time.
I was very disappointed. I regret the fact that I was not aggressive enough and that I didn't press harder to take that to trial.
After 13 years of marriage, Rob filed for divorce and received full custody of Justin and Brittany.
I guess I'm grateful, after all, that at least the children are safe. Lisa never asked about the kids. She never mentioned them. Let's just say there's a special place in hell for people like that.
Today, Rob continues to work at the family insurance company and remains a devoted father to his 2 children.
It's hard to be a single parent, but my folks did kick in and we became part of a team, I guess.
Rob is truly an inspiration. He has remained strong for his family throughout this whole ordeal.
Since her release in 1997, Lisa has never reached out to Brittany or Justin.
I'll never really understand it. I don't know if a person can really put something this devastating totally behind them, but you don't have to let that, define your life.
The concept of a small town often carries a specific set of unspoken promises. In the collective imagination, a small town is a sanctuary, a place where doors can be left unlocked, where neighbors know each other by name, and where the most pressing community issues are debated in the aisles of the local grocery store or the vestibules of the neighborhood church. Wiley, Texas, in the year 1980, was the living embodiment of this idyllic American promise. It was a place where the pace of life was dictated by the ringing of school bells and the Sunday morning sermons. The families who settled in Wiley sought refuge from the chaotic sprawl of larger cities, seeking a quiet existence anchored in traditional values, hard work, and communal faith. In this closely knit environment, the Methodist Church served not just as a place of worship, but as the absolute epicenter of social life. It was here that friendships were forged, social hierarchies were subtly established, and the moral fabric of the community was woven week after week. However, the tragedy that would soon unfold in Wiley would permanently shatter this illusion of suburban safety, revealing a terrifying truth about the human psyche and the darkness that can fester behind the most perfectly manicured lawns and the brightest, most welcoming smiles. At the center of this tight community were two women who, on the surface, represented the very ideals of the era. Candy Montgomery was the quintessential suburban housewife, a woman whose life appeared to be a masterclass in domestic perfection. She was undeniably sociable, radiating a warm, approachable energy that made her a natural focal point in any gathering. Candy was deeply integrated into the community fabric, participating enthusiastically in the local parent-teacher association and lending her voice to the church choir. She was the kind of woman who seemingly had an endless reserve of energy for organizing events, volunteering, and maintaining a flawless home environment. Her existence was a testament to the expected roles of women in her community, portraying a life of serene contentment. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed facade of the happy homemaker, a quiet, suffocating desperation was slowly taking root. The endless cycle of domestic duties, church gatherings, and neighborhood socializing had begun to feel entirely predictable and overwhelmingly mundane. Candy found herself trapped in a life that was undeniably peaceful but intensely boring, lacking the spark of excitement or passion that she secretly craved. In stark contrast, yet intimately connected to Candy, was Betty Gore. Betty was a dedicated elementary school teacher, a profession that commanded respect and highlighted her nurturing nature. She was a close friend to Candy, their lives intertwined through their shared faith and regular church activities. Betty was married to Alan Gore, and together they were navigating the complexities of family life. However, Betty's internal world was fraught with a different kind of struggle. Following the birth of her child, she began experiencing the heavy, debilitating weight of postpartum depression, a condition that was often misunderstood and largely unspoken of during that era. Her struggles brought a shadow over her household, creating a silent strain on her marriage to Alan. Despite their differences in temperament and internal struggles, Betty and Candy shared a bond, confiding in one another and participating in the same social circles. The bitter irony of their friendship would later become the focal point of a national spectacle, as the lines between loyalty, betrayal, and unspeakable violence were violently blurred. The catalyst for the impending catastrophe was a deeply hidden transgression. Driven by her profound sense of marital ennui, Candy Montgomery took a step that would irrevocably alter the course of multiple lives. She actively initiated a clandestine, extramarital affair with Alan Gore, the husband of her close friend. Beginning in late 1978, this secret relationship provided Candy with the thrill and validation she had been desperately seeking outside the confines of her predictable life. For several months, The two engaged in a hidden romance, navigating the perilous waters of deception within a community where everyone knew everyone else's business. However, the affair was ultimately short-lived. Alan, recognizing the growing emotional needs of his wife Betty, especially in the wake of her severe postpartum depression, made the decision to terminate the romantic entanglement with Candy. He chose to recommit himself to his marriage and his family, leaving the affair in the past. To all outward appearances, the dangerous chapter had been closed safely, and life in Wiley resumed its quiet, uninterrupted rhythm. This fragile peace was violently shattered on the morning of Friday, June 13, 1980. Alan Gore was away from Wiley, having traveled to Minnesota for a business trip, leaving Betty at home with their children. The morning began with the most ordinary and mundane of intentions. One of the Gore children was staying over at the Montgomery household, and Candy needed to retrieve a swimsuit from Betty's house. It was a simple, neighborly errand, the kind of brief interaction that occurred countless times a day in Wiley. Candy drove to the Gore residence, entirely unprepared for the confrontation that awaited her. Inside the quiet house, the suppressed tensions and hidden truths finally erupted. Betty, having somehow deduced or suspected the truth, directly confronted Candy about the illicit relationship with her husband. Candy admitted to the affair, but insisted that it had ended long ago, a remnant of the past that held no bearing on the present. But for Betty, the revelation was a devastating betrayal by a woman she considered a friend. The emotional confrontation rapidly deteriorated, escalating from a heated verbal exchange into a situation of unimaginable horror. The transition from a quiet suburban morning to a scene of absolute carnage occurred with terrifying speed. During the escalating argument, Betty moved to the garage and returned wielding a heavy, wooden-handled axe. A desperate and violent physical struggle ensued between the two women. In the chaos of the fight, Candy managed to wrest the weapon away from Betty. What followed was an act of violence so extreme, so profoundly brutal, that it defies logical comprehension. Candy Montgomery struck Betty Gore with the axe a staggering 41 times. 28 of those devastating blows were directed at Betty's head and face, inflicting catastrophic and instantly fatal injuries. The sheer physical exertion required to swing an axe 41 times speaks to a level of rage and frenzy that completely obliterated the quiet, church-going persona Candy had meticulously maintained. Betty Gore died on the floor of her own home, the victim of an attack whose savagery would soon shock the entire nation. The immediate aftermath of the killing was as chilling as the act itself. Having just committed an act of unspeakable brutality, Candy Montgomery did not panic, nor did she immediately summon the authorities. Instead, she methodically washed herself in the victim's own bathroom, attempting to cleanse the physical evidence of the slaughter from her body. She made efforts to conceal the crime scene, leaving the lifeless body of her friend behind. Most disturbingly, she simply walked out of the house, leaving Betty's innocent 1-year-old baby entirely alone in the residence. Candy returned to her own home and seamlessly re-entered her daily routine, attending to her children and her chores as if she had not just participated in a bloodbath. For hours, the baby remained alone in the house with the deceased mother, until concerned neighbors, acting on the frantic requests of Alan Gore, who could not reach his wife by phone, finally entered the home and discovered the gruesome scene. When the case eventually went to trial in October of 1980, it became an absolute media sensation, drawing intense national scrutiny to the small town of Wiley. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculated, jealous killer who brutally eliminated her rival and callously covered her tracks. They pointed to the sheer number of axe wounds as undeniable proof of malicious intent, arguing that 41 strikes went far beyond any reasonable definition of self-defense. They highlighted her cold, calculated actions after the fact, washing the blood away and abandoning an infant. However, the defense, led by attorney Don Crowder, presented a narrative that was as controversial as it was unprecedented. They did not deny that Candy had killed Betty, but they argued forcefully that she had done so in pure self-defense, reacting only after Betty had attacked her first with the axe. The crux of the defense's argument, and the detail that would cement this case in the annals of true crime history, relied on complex psychological testimony. A psychiatrist and hypnotist named Fred Faison was brought to the stand to explain the inexplicable savagery of the 41 blows. He testified that during the struggle, Betty had made a simple shushing sound, telling Candy to be quiet. According to the psychological evaluation, this single, innocuous sound triggered a deeply repressed childhood trauma in Candy, relating to a time when her mother had violently silenced her when she was a 4-year-old child in pain. The defense argued that this trigger caused Candy to enter a severe dissociative state, a sudden and total break from reality. In this uncontrollable psychological fugue, she was no longer a suburban housewife defending herself. She was a traumatized child lashing out blindly and relentlessly, completely unaware of the sheer horror of her actions until the dissociative episode passed. In a verdict that continues to spark fierce debate and utter disbelief decades later, the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, accepted the defense's argument. On October 29, 1980, Candy Montgomery was found not guilty of murder, fully acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. The announcement of the verdict sent a shockwave of outrage through the Wiley community. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, chanting and screaming in protest, utterly unable to reconcile the reality of a 41-strike axe killing with a declaration of innocence. The community felt deeply betrayed by the justice system, unable to fathom how a woman could walk free after committing such a visceral act of violence against a friend and leaving a baby motherless. Candy, legally exonerated but forever branded by the court of public opinion, eventually relocated to Georgia with her husband, reverting to her maiden name and, remarkably, building a new life working in the field of mental health counseling and family therapy. This story is not merely a recounting of a historical crime. It is a profound exploration of the duality of human nature. It forces us to examine the terrifying proximity of violence to our everyday lives, residing just beneath the veneer of suburban normalcy. It challenges our understanding of the justice system, the depths of psychological trauma, and the boundaries of self-defense. It asks us to look closely at the perfect facades we construct and the devastating consequences that can occur when the pressures of a quiet life violently collide with hidden desires and repressed rage. As we delve deep into the timeline, the evidence, and the unprecedented trial of Candy Montgomery, we are left to grapple with an unsettling question. How well do we truly know the people who sing beside us in the choir, who smile at us across the picket fences, and who we invite into our homes? The Wiley axe murder remains a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound darkness is born in the brightest, most ordinary of places. To understand the tragedy that befell Betty Gore, one must first understand the environment that shaped her daily existence and the suffocatingly close-knit community that ultimately served as the stage for her sudden demise. Wiley, Texas, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, was a place in transition, yet fiercely clinging to its traditional conservative roots. Located just far enough from the sprawling, chaotic urban expansion of Dallas, Wiley was a haven for those seeking a quieter, more predictable rhythm of life. It was a landscape characterized by wide, open Texas skies, unrelenting summer heat, and a burgeoning suburban sprawl that slowly replaced expansive agricultural fields with neatly paved cul-de-sacs and identical, perfectly maintained single-family homes. In this environment, uniformity was not merely an architectural choice, but a rigid social expectation. To fit into Wiley was to conform to a specific American ideal, one built upon the foundational pillars of hard work, visible morality, and most importantly, active and enthusiastic participation in the local religious community. The First United Methodist Church was the absolute beating heart of this town. It was far more than a building for Sunday worship. It was the primary social registry, the community center, and the ultimate arbiter of local status. If you wanted to belong in Wiley, you belonged to the church. You attended the weekly potlucks, you joined the choir, you volunteered for the vacation Bible school, and you opened your life to the constant scrutiny and support of your congregation. It was a place of profound fellowship, but also a place where keeping up appearances was a demanding full-time occupation. In this world of forced cheerfulness and unspoken rules, personal vulnerabilities were often hidden behind polite smiles, and the pressure to project a flawless family life was immense and unrelenting. It was within this demanding social ecosystem that Betty Pomeroy Gore tried to carve out a meaningful and secure life. Betty was, by all accounts from those who truly knew her, a woman of deep substance, quiet dedication, and profound sensitivity. Born and raised with strict traditional values, she carried herself with a gentle earnestness that endeared her to those who took the time to look past her shy exterior. She found her true professional calling in the classroom, working diligently as an elementary school teacher. Teaching was not merely a job or a paycheck for Betty. It was a vocation that perfectly aligned with her natural nurturing spirit. In the classroom, surrounded by children who relied on her for guidance, structure, and knowledge, Betty truly blossomed. She was known to be incredibly patient, possessing a natural, quiet ability to connect with young minds and foster a safe, encouraging learning environment. Her students saw a woman who was kind, dependable, and unconditionally supportive of their growth. However, the confident and capable woman who stood at the chalkboard often struggled to maintain that same sense of assurance in her personal life. Beneath her warm, maternal exterior, Betty was a woman constantly wrestling with deep-seated insecurities and a pervasive sense of inadequacy. She was naturally introverted in a community that heavily rewarded and celebrated extroversion, while others effortlessly navigated the bustling social hours after Sunday service. Betty often found the relentless socializing to be emotionally draining and deeply intimidating. She desperately desired genuine connection and close friendships, but she lacked the effortless, bubbly charisma that seemed to come so naturally to the other wives and mothers in her affluent circle. She was a serious, deeply feeling person in an environment that often demanded a superficial performance of perpetual happiness. This harsh disconnect between her internal emotional landscape and the external expectations of her community planted the early seeds of a profound, isolating loneliness. Betty's search for stability, companionship, and love ultimately led her to Alan Gore. Their relationship, in its early stages, was built on a solid foundation of shared values and mutual aspirations for a traditional, quiet family life. Alan was practical, mathematically minded, grounded, and provided a sense of financial and emotional security that Betty desperately craved. When they married, they eagerly embraced the typical trajectory expected of young, upwardly mobile couples in their milieu. They bought a comfortable house, settled deeply into the Wiley community, and began planning for a family. For a time, their life together seemed to flawlessly follow the prescribed script of suburban success. However, the complex realities of marriage are rarely as uncomplicated as the romantic ideals they are built upon. As the years progressed, the Gores found themselves navigating the quiet, often unspoken challenges that slowly erode marital intimacy. Alan was a dedicated provider, deeply focused on his career in the burgeoning tech industry, which frequently required him to travel away from home for extended periods. These business trips, while financially necessary for their lifestyle, created a vast physical and emotional distance between the couple. While Alan was navigating the professional world and experiencing life outside the town limits, Betty was increasingly confined to the domestic sphere. The arrival of their children, a joyous milestone they had both eagerly anticipated, paradoxically triggered the darkest chapter of Betty's internal life. The profound physical and hormonal shifts of childbirth, combined with the crushing, exhausting, and often solitary demands of motherhood, plunged Betty into the absolute depths of severe postpartum depression. In the late 1970s, postpartum depression was not a topic of open, empathetic discussion. It was frequently dismissed by medical professionals and peers alike as the baby blues, a temporary feminine weakness that a good, faithful mother was simply expected to push through with a smile and a prayer. For Betty, it was a debilitating, suffocating darkness. She experienced overwhelming daily anxiety, periods of profound weeping sadness, and a terrifying sense of losing control over her own mind and body. She felt entirely unmoored, struggling intensely to find joy in the very family she had so desperately wanted to build. The profound isolation of her condition was magnified exponentially by the manufactured perfection she saw reflected in the lives of the women around her, making her feel uniquely broken, guilty, and utterly inadequate as a mother and a wife. It was precisely during this prolonged period of immense vulnerability and desperate need for social connection that Betty's life became deeply and tragically intertwined with Candy Montgomery. On the surface, the two women were a complete study in contrasts. Candy was everything Betty felt she inherently was not. Candy was vibrant, perpetually energetic, relentlessly social, and exuded an aura of effortless, magnetic confidence. Where Betty was quiet, cautious, and reserved, Candy was loud, commanding, and easily drew people into her vibrant orbit. They met through the First United Methodist Church, naturally gravitating toward one another through shared, structured activities like the church choir and the various women's domestic groups. Despite their fundamental differences in personality and temperament, a friendship slowly blossomed. Betty genuinely admired Candy's seemingly boundless energy and her uncanny ability to navigate the complex, gossipy social dynamics of Wiley with such flawless ease. Candy, in turn, perhaps enjoyed the role of the more dominant, guiding figure in the friendship, finding a quiet, endlessly receptive, and non-judgmental audience in Betty. They spent considerable time together, coordinating afternoon playdates for their children, attending church functions side by side, and sharing the mundane, repetitive details of their respective domestic lives over cups of coffee. To the outside observer, and indeed to Betty herself, they were simply two suburban mothers enjoying a typical, supportive, and mutually beneficial friendship. However, the psychological dynamic was inherently unbalanced. Betty, struggling silently with her deteriorating mental health and feeling increasingly disconnected from her constantly traveling husband, leaned heavily on the social structure and outward stability that Candy represented. She trusted Candy implicitly, welcoming her into her home and her deepest confidence, entirely unaware that the very woman she considered a close friend and trusted confidant was actively harboring a devastating secret that would ultimately destroy her entire world. The tragedy of Betty Gore is magnified beyond comprehension by the intimate nature of the betrayal that surrounded her on all sides. While Betty was fighting a desperate, solitary internal battle against crippling depression, desperately trying to keep her fragile marriage and family intact, her husband Alan and her closest friend Candy were actively dismantling the very foundation of her life behind her back. The clandestine affair between Candy and Alan did not stem from a grand, uncontrollable romantic passion, but rather from a highly toxic combination of suburban boredom, logistical convenience, and a staggering, chilling lack of empathy for the woman they were deceiving. Candy, feeling suffocated and restless by the very suburban perfection she projected so flawlessly to the congregation, actively sought an illicit outlet for her repressed energy. Alan, perhaps overwhelmed by the heavy, depressive atmosphere of his own home and Betty's complex emotional needs, allowed himself to be easily drawn into the secret arrangement. Their hidden meetings, meticulously and coldly planned around church events, choir practices, and Betty's own predictable daily schedule, were a profound and calculated violation of the immense trust Betty had placed in both of them. Every warm smile Candy offered Betty in the church pews, every comforting word she spoke regarding Betty's tearful struggles with motherhood, was irreparably tainted by the ultimate, devastating deception. Betty was surrounded by a community that prided itself above all else on moral fortitude and Christian fellowship, yet she was being systematically betrayed by the two people closest to her within that very sanctuary. As the affair quietly progressed and eventually reached its conclusion, the psychological toll on Betty, though she remained entirely ignorant of the specific, sordid facts, was undeniably profound. The emotional distance from Alan grew more pronounced, a chasm she could feel but not logically explain. Even after Alan finally ended the physical affair with Candy in an attempt to refocus his energy on his deteriorating marriage, the invisible damage to the relational fabric had already been done. Alan's renewed commitment was a positive step, but his lingering guilt and emotional distance could not instantly erase the deep-seated insecurities and anxieties that had taken firm root in Betty's exhausted mind. She remained highly anxious, hypervigilant to subtle shifts in Alan's mood, and terrified of losing the fragile, tentative stability they were slowly trying to rebuild. She was a woman living constantly on the edge of her frayed nerves, desperate for consistent reassurance and terrified of ultimate abandonment. It is absolutely crucial to view Betty Gore not merely as a passive, tragic victim waiting in the wings for the inevitable horror to strike, but as a real, complex woman fighting a deeply difficult, courageous battle for her own happiness and mental well-being in a stifling environment that offered very little genuine, professional support for her specific psychological pain. She was actively trying to heal, actively trying to be the loving mother and devoted wife she truly believed she was supposed to be. When the fateful morning of Friday, June 13th dawned, Betty was alone in her house. Alan was hundreds of miles away in the state of Minnesota, and her emotional state was as fragile and brittle as glass. She was entirely unaware that the violent culmination of months of hidden betrayals, suppressed tensions, and unspoken resentments was about to literally walk through her front door. The stage was perfectly and tragically set in the quiet, sunlit, beautifully manicured suburbs of Wiley. The community went about its innocent, mundane daily routines, completely oblivious to the horrific fact that the meticulous, pristine facade of one of their most prominent families was about to be violently and permanently torn away, exposing a breathtaking darkness that would brutally claim the life of a woman who had only ever wanted to find her quiet, safe place in the world. The morning of Friday, June 13th, 1980, dawned over the suburban landscape of Wiley, Texas, with the unremarkable warmth and bright, steady sunlight typical of the impending southern summer. It was a day that began just like thousands of others in this quiet community, filled with the mundane routines of carpools, household chores, and the distant, comforting sounds of neighborhood children playing in expansive backyards. Alan Gore was miles away from this domestic tranquility, having traveled to the state of Minnesota for a corporate business trip, effectively leaving his wife Betty alone to manage their household and their two young children. At the Montgomery residence, the morning was equally steeped in typical suburban chaos, though marked by a specific, neighborly obligation. The eldest Gore child, a young girl, had spent the previous night sleeping over at the Montgomery house, an arrangement that perfectly illustrated the deeply intertwined nature of the two families. Because the children had plans to attend a swimming lesson later that day, Candy Montgomery found herself burdened with a simple, seemingly inconsequential errand. She needed to drive over to the Gore residence to retrieve the young girl's swimsuit. It was a task so ordinary, so perfectly aligned with her role as a helpful, active mother and friend, that it carried absolutely no foreboding weight. Candy dressed for the day, stepping out into the Texas heat, completely unaware that this trivial journey across town would serve as the catalyst for an event of unimaginable violence, permanently severing the fragile threads that held their lives together and plunging the community into an abyss of horror. Candy navigated the familiar streets of Wiley, turning into the quiet cul-de-sac where the Gore family resided. The house stood silent and still, a portrait of middle-class stability with its neatly trimmed lawn and drawn curtains. Upon arriving, Candy approached the front door and knocked, waiting in the stillness of the suburban morning. Betty Gore answered the door, her demeanor carrying the heavy, exhausted weight of her ongoing battle with postpartum depression, exacerbated by the absence of her husband and the relentless demands of caring for her one-year-old infant who remained inside the house. Betty allowed Candy to step across the threshold, inviting her into a home that was about to transform into a site of unspeakable carnage. The initial exchange between the two women was likely brief and entirely transactional, focused on the location of the swimsuit in the utility room. Candy moved through the familiar interior of the Gore home, a space she had visited countless times before under the guise of friendship and church fellowship. However, the atmosphere inside the house was dense with an unspoken, suffocating tension. Betty had been harboring a devastating suspicion, a growing, terrible realization regarding the nature of the relationship between her constantly traveling husband and the woman who now stood in her hallway. The physical presence of Candy Montgomery, the very embodiment of Betty's deepest insecurities and fears, proved to be an overwhelming catalyst. As Candy prepared to leave, holding the retrieved swimsuit, the heavy silence of the house was shattered by a confrontation that had been quietly brewing for months. Without raising her voice, but with a sudden, piercing directness, Betty confronted Candy about the agonizing suspicion that had been consuming her. She asked plainly and unequivocally if Candy was engaged in an intimate relationship with her husband, Alan. The question hung in the air, a devastating breach of the polite, superficial social contract that governed their lives in Wiley. In that solitary moment, the carefully constructed facade of their friendship completely collapsed, exposing the ugly, raw truth beneath. Candy, cornered and suddenly stripped of her usual confident composure, chose not to deny the accusation. Instead, she admitted to the affair, confirming Betty's worst nightmares. However, Candy immediately attempted to mitigate the profound damage of her confession by vehemently insisting that the romantic entanglement was a relic of the past, a mistake that had been entirely concluded long ago and held absolutely no current significance. For Candy, this admission might have been a desperate attempt to defuse a highly volatile situation, a way to acknowledge the transgression while simultaneously dismissing its importance. But for Betty, the confirmation of the affair was a catastrophic psychological blow. It was not merely a confirmation of marital infidelity. It was a profound, soul-crushing betrayal by a woman she had trusted, confided in, and welcomed into her sacred domestic space. The revelation validated every paranoid fear, every moment of inadequacy, and every silent tear she had shed during her struggle with depression. The reality she had fought so desperately to hold on to was suddenly and violently ripped away, replaced by an overwhelming tide of grief, humiliation, and a rapidly escalating, blinding anger. The confrontation, initially confined to a tense verbal exchange, rapidly spiraled out of control, shifting from a heartbreaking domestic dispute into a situation of terrifying, imminent physical danger. Betty, consumed by the agonizing reality of the betrayal, abruptly left the immediate area of the confrontation, disappearing into the adjacent garage. When she returned a few moments later, the entire dynamic of the encounter shifted into a realm of pure, unadulterated horror. Betty was now holding a heavy, wooden-handled axe, a crude and brutal tool of manual labor that looked grotesquely out of place in the pristine, carpeted interior of a suburban home. The sight of the weapon instantly transformed the environment from a place of domestic security into a claustrophobic, lethal trap. The physical altercation that ensued was chaotic, desperate, and defined by a terrifying, primal struggle for survival. The two women, former friends bound by church hymnals and community bake sales, engaged in a violent, grappling struggle within the confined space of the utility room. The heavy wooden handle of the axe became the focal point of a frantic tug-of-war, with both women fighting with the frantic, uncoordinated energy of pure adrenaline and absolute panic. In the terrifying closeness of the struggle, the boundaries of civilized behavior completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, desperate instinct to dominate and survive. During the intense physical struggle, the momentum shifted fatally. Candy, perhaps fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline or a sudden, explosive release of deeply repressed psychological rage, managed to overpower Betty and physically wrest the heavy axe from her grasp. What transpired next remains one of the most chilling and incomprehensible acts of violence in modern criminal history. Having secured control of the weapon, Candy Montgomery did not merely strike a defensive blow to neutralize the threat or attempt to flee the residence. Instead, she unleashed a barrage of violence so extreme, so relentlessly savage, that it defies all logical understanding of human behavior. Candy swung the heavy axe and struck Betty a total of 41 times. The sheer physical stamina required to deliver 41 distinct blows with a heavy, cumbersome weapon indicates an extended duration of unimaginable brutality. The nature of the injuries inflicted painted a picture of absolute, terrifying overkill. 28 of the 41 devastating strikes were directed specifically at Betty's head and face, completely destroying her physical identity and inflicting catastrophic, immediately fatal trauma. The utility room, a space designated for laundry and mundane household chores, was transformed into an incomprehensible scene of slaughter, the walls and floor saturated with the grim evidence of a frenzied, unstoppable attack. Betty Gore, a dedicated teacher, a struggling mother, and a woman who had simply sought honesty in her own home was brutally extinguished in a storm of unimaginable violence. The immediate aftermath of the killing presented a psychological portrait just as terrifying as the 41 blows of the axe. As the violent frenzy finally subsided and the silence of the suburban morning crept back into the house, Candy Montgomery stood alone amidst the horrific devastation she had just created. Her actions in the moments and hours following the murder were characterized by a chilling, methodical detachment that starkly contradicted the explosive rage of the attack. She did not collapse in horror, she did not immediately contact emergency services, and she did not attempt to seek help for the woman she had just slaughtered. Instead, Candy proceeded to the victim's own bathroom. There, she systematically stripped off her blood-soaked garments and stepped into the shower, carefully and deliberately washing the physical evidence of the murder from her skin and hair. This act of bathing in the home of the woman she had just brutally killed speaks to a profound, deeply disturbing psychological compartmentalization. After cleansing herself, Candy dressed, gathered her belongings, and actively attempted to conceal her presence at the crime scene. She walked out of the house, stepping back into the bright, innocent sunshine of the Texas morning, leaving the mutilated body of her former friend lying on the utility room floor. Most horrifyingly, when Candy closed the door behind her and walked away from the scene of the crime, she deliberately abandoned Betty's 1-year-old infant, who was awake and alone in a crib in another room of the house. For hours, the helpless child remained completely isolated in the residence, separated only by a few walls from the gruesome remains of her mother. Candy seamlessly reintegrated herself into the normal flow of her day, returning to her own home, interacting with her children, and continuing her planned schedule with an outward composure that entirely masked the monstrous act she had just committed. She ate, she spoke to neighbors, and she maintained the flawless facade of the suburban housewife, all while a baby cried in an empty house across town and a husband desperately tried to reach a wife who would never answer the phone again. It was not until much later in the day, when a frantic Alan Gore, deeply unsettled by his inability to contact Betty, pleaded with neighbors to force entry into the home, that the door was finally opened. The neighbors discovered the crying, distressed infant first, before following the horrifying trail that led them to the utility room. The discovery of Betty Gore's body shattered the peace of Wiley forever, instantly transforming the quiet community into the epicenter of a sprawling, dark investigation. The absolute cognitive dissonance between the serene environment of Wiley and the savage reality of the utility room is central to understanding the enduring shock of this case. The neighborhood outside the Gore residence remained entirely undisturbed throughout the duration of the violent ordeal. Mail carriers continued their routes, sprinklers methodically watered green lawns, and other mothers went about their daily grocery shopping, completely oblivious to the fact that a nightmare of biblical proportions had just unfolded behind a familiar front door. This stark contrast highlights the terrifying invisibility of domestic violence and the dark secrets that can fester behind closed doors. For Betty Gore, her final moments were spent in agonizing terror and profound betrayal, fighting for her life against a woman she had previously trusted. Her death was not a sudden, clean tragedy, but a prolonged, brutal, and intensely personal annihilation. The 41 strikes of the axe were not merely a means of causing death. They represented an absolute, uncontrolled erasure of a human being. The fact that Candy Montgomery could execute such a thorough, intimate destruction and then simply wash her hands, step back out into the daylight, and seamlessly resume her role as a pillar of the community, forces a terrifying reevaluation of human capability. It leaves a lingering, deeply unsettling realization that the most profound capacity for violence may not reside in the shadows of dark alleyways, but can emerge, fully formed and ruthlessly destructive, in the brightly lit, mundane spaces of our everyday lives. The discovery of Betty Gore's mutilated body inside the quiet suburban home instantly fractured the fragile illusion of security that defined Wiley, Texas, transforming a peaceful neighborhood into the epicenter of a chilling homicide investigation. Within hours, the local police department, unaccustomed to violent crime of such grotesque magnitude, found themselves navigating a crime scene that defied easy comprehension. The interior of the house, particularly the utility room, presented a tableau of absolute carnage. Blood spattered the walls, saturated the flooring, and pooled around the remains of the young teacher, telling a silent, horrifying story of a desperate and prolonged struggle. Investigators immediately recognized that this was not a professional hit or a random home invasion. The sheer intimacy of the attack, marked by the weapon of choice and the overwhelming frenzy of the blows, pointed directly to someone who knew the victim personally. As word of the murder swept through the tight-knit community, an electric wave of panic and disbelief rippled from house to house. Neighbors who had waved to Betty just days before stood in clusters on the sunlit sidewalks, whispering in hushed tones, unable to reconcile the peaceful atmosphere of their idyllic cul-de-sac with the monstrous act that had just occurred behind closed doors. The local authorities quickly cordoned off the property, securing the perimeter with yellow crime scene tape that fluttered gently in the summer breeze, while forensic teams descended upon the home to begin the painstaking, meticulous process of gathering physical evidence, documenting every drop of blood, every fiber, and every footprint left behind by the perpetrator. At the center of the unfolding investigative puzzle was Alan Gore, currently stranded hundreds of miles away in Minnesota, thrust into an unimaginable nightmare of grief and shock. Upon receiving the devastating news of his wife's murder, Alan's mind raced through the terrible implications, prompting him to call his neighbors in Wiley to check on Betty when his repeated phone calls went unanswered. When those neighbors finally forced their way into the house and discovered the horrifying truth, Alan immediately returned to Texas, arriving back in a community that was now swarming with reporters, police officers, and anxious onlookers. During the initial police interviews, Alan was subjected to intense, rigorous questioning as investigators sought to build a complete timeline of the household's recent activities. It was during these early interrogation sessions that Alan bravely, albeit painfully, offered investigators the crucial piece of information that would completely pivot the trajectory of the entire case. He candidly confessed to the police about his past extramarital affair with Candy Montgomery, laying bare the hidden, toxic undercurrents of their social circle. For the detectives, this revelation was a monumental breakthrough. It provided an immediate, compelling motive rooted in jealousy, betrayal, and interpersonal conflict. The focus of the investigation narrowed sharply, shifting away from random suspects and settling squarely upon the woman who had spent years projecting an image of pristine domestic perfection and deep Christian fellowship. The detectives realized that the polite, cheerful churchgoer known as Candy Montgomery was harboring secrets dark enough to drive a person to unimaginable acts of violence. With the disclosure of the affair, the police turned their investigative spotlight directly toward Candy Montgomery, beginning a psychological and tactical chess match to uncover the truth. Detectives gathered to plan their approach, knowing they were dealing with a suspect who was intelligent, well-liked, and deeply embedded in the community's power structures. They needed to tread carefully while closing the net around her. When investigators first approached Candy for questioning, she displayed an eerie, disquieting calmness that immediately put the seasoned officers on high alert. She maintained the outward demeanor of an innocent, grieving friend, expressing profound shock and deep sorrow over Betty's tragic death, all while seamlessly weaving a narrative designed to distance herself entirely from the crime scene. However, as the detectives began to press her on her exact movements during the morning of Friday, June 13th, inconsistencies began to emerge beneath her carefully polished exterior. They confronted her with the timeline, her known visit to the Gore residence to retrieve the swimsuit, and the undeniable fact that her husband had been away, leaving her as one of the very last people known to have interacted with Betty. Candy initially attempted to downplay the depth of her confrontation with Betty, but the mounting circumstantial pressure began to crack her composure. The investigators were armed not only with Alan's confession regarding the affair, but also with physical evidence collected from the crime scene that demanded immediate, rigorous explanation. As the forensic investigation progressed, the physical evidence gathered from the Gore residence began to paint an increasingly damning and inescapable portrait of Candy Montgomery's direct involvement. Crime scene technicians meticulously analyzed the blood spatter patterns, footprints, and latent prints left within the house, corroborating a narrative of violent struggle and desperate self-preservation by the victim. More critically, Investigators uncovered physical items linked directly to Candy that placed her at the very epicenter of the slaughter. Faced with the mounting weight of forensic science and the tightening circle of police interrogation, Candy's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed under the immense pressure. Realizing that the web of deception could no longer sustain her, she made the critical decision to alter her legal strategy, transitioning from a posture of innocent denial to a desperate claim of self-defense. This monumental shift transformed the impending trial from a straightforward murder prosecution into a complex, psychological battleground. The police had successfully built a solid, evidence-based case that proved Candy was present and wielded the axe that ended Betty's life. But the legal system was now about to enter uncharted waters, forced to grapple not just with the physical actions of the killer, but with the terrifying, labyrinthine depths of the human mind under extreme psychological duress. The investigative phase concluded not with a mystery of who committed the act, but with a profound, unsettling question of what could possibly drive a seemingly gentle suburban housewife to strike a fellow human being 41 times with an axe. The stage for the trial was set in the autumn of 1980, transforming the quiet courthouse in Texas into a national amphitheater of sensationalized media coverage and public outrage. As the proceedings commenced, the small town of Wiley found itself completely overrun by reporters, television crews, and curious onlookers from across the country, all eager to catch a glimpse of the woman accused of a crime so brutal it defied comprehension. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation, a stark contrast to the sleepy, orderly rhythm that typically characterized local legal matters. The prosecution stepped forward to present their case with meticulous precision, anchoring their arguments in the undeniable physical brutality of the crime. They laid out a narrative of cold, calculated murder driven by dark jealousy, bitter resentment, and an absolute desire to eliminate a romantic rival. The state pointed to the sheer scale of the violence, emphasizing that 41 distinct blows of an axe, with 28 directed squarely at the victim's head and face, could never be misconstrued as a measured or reasonable response to a threat. They argued that the meticulous cleanup efforts, the washing of blood in the victim's bathroom, and the calm abandonment of a helpless infant demonstrated a chilling level of premeditation and a calculated attempt to escape justice. To the prosecutors and the outraged members of the public, the evidence pointed unequivocally to a ruthless killer who deserved to face the full and unforgiving weight of the law for the horrific destruction of an innocent life. In stark opposition to the state's aggressive narrative, the defense team, spearheaded by the fiercely strategic attorney Don Crowder, adopted a daring and unprecedented legal strategy that completely stunned the courtroom. They did not attempt to deny that Candy Montgomery had swung the axe that ended Betty Gore's life, recognizing that the overwhelming physical and forensic evidence made such a denial impossible. Instead, Crowder chose to lean directly into the horror, embracing the grim reality of the 41 blows while offering an explanation that fundamentally reframed the entire nature of the act. The core pillar of the defense's case was absolute self-defense, asserting that Betty Gore had initiated the violent confrontation by fetching the weapon and attacking Candy first. They portrayed Candy not as a calculated aggressor, but as a terrified woman desperately fighting for her own survival within the claustrophobic confines of the utility room. However, anticipating that the sheer number of axe strikes would still trouble the jury and suggest an extreme overreaction, the defense introduced a psychological defense mechanism so radical and controversial that it would become the central defining element of the entire trial. They argued that Candy had acted while in the grip of an uncontrollable, dissociative psychological state, a sudden and total break from reality triggered by a deeply repressed childhood trauma that was inadvertently awakened during the struggle. To substantiate this extraordinary psychological claim, the defense called upon a prominent psychiatrist and hypnotist named Fred Faison to provide expert testimony before the court. Dr. Faison presented a detailed, highly technical breakdown of the human mind under extreme stress, explaining to the spellbound jury how the human psyche can fracture and retreat inward as a protective mechanism against unbearable emotional pain. He testified that during the chaotic, high-stakes struggle between the two women, Betty Gore had made a simple, innocuous sound, uttering a quiet, shushing noise to tell Candy to be quiet. According to the psychological evaluation and the hypnotic regression sessions conducted with the defendant, that single, specific sound acted as a catastrophic neurological trigger. It instantly transported Candy back to a deeply buried, terrifying moment from her early childhood when she was 4 years old, and her mother had violently forced her to remain silent while she was suffering from a painful physical injury. The defense argued that this sensory trigger caused Candy to experience a severe dissociative reaction, plunging her into a fugue state where she completely lost touch with her conscious awareness and her surroundings. In that dark psychological space, she was no longer a suburban housewife defending herself from a friend. She was a helpless, traumatized child lashing out in a blind, primal frenzy to survive a perceived mortal threat. The 41 blows, according to this interpretation, were delivered by a person who was entirely disconnected from reality, unaware of the carnage she was inflicting until the dissociative episode miraculously lifted, leaving her standing alone amidst the ruins of the crime scene. The prosecution fiercely attacked the psychological defense, characterizing it as an elaborate, convenient fabrication designed to absolve a brutal murderer of her undeniable guilt. They cross-examined the medical experts relentlessly, pushing them to explain how a person experiencing a dissociative fugue could maintain the precise physical coordination required to wield a heavy axe 41 times without injuring themselves, and how that same person could immediately possess the presence of mind to calmly wash off blood, change clothes, and orchestrate a cover-up. The state argued that dissociative reactions typically result in confusion and disorientation, not methodical cleanup and calculated deception. They appealed to common sense, urging the jury to look past the complex medical jargon and focus on the undeniable reality of a human life extinguished with unimaginable savagery. The courtroom became a battleground of competing interpretations of human nature, contrasting the cold, clear facts of physical evidence against the murky, invisible depths of psychological trauma. Day after day, witnesses took the stand, detailing the mundane details of their friendships, the hidden tensions of the affair, and the horrific state of the crime scene, while the public watched with bated breath, knowing that the verdict would send shockwaves far beyond the borders of Texas. As the trial drew to a close, both legal teams delivered impassioned closing arguments that encapsulated the profound gravity and stark polarization of the case. The prosecution implored the jury to uphold justice, arguing that accepting a defense based on a childhood memory triggering an axe attack would set a dangerous legal precedent, suggesting that anyone could commit a horrific crime and escape accountability simply by claiming a temporary psychological blackout. They reminded the courtroom of Betty Gore, the teacher, the mother, and the friend who had been brutally silenced, denied the opportunity to defend herself against the state's narrative, and left lying in a pool of blood while her infant cried alone in the next room. In contrast, the defense delivered a passionate plea for empathy and understanding, urging the jurors to recognize the fragile, complex nature of the human mind when pushed to its absolute breaking point. They emphasized that Candy was a victim of her own deeply repressed subconscious, trapped in a terrifying moment of survival where reason and control had completely abandoned her. The fate of Candy Montgomery now rested entirely in the hands of the 12 individuals who made up the jury, 9 women and 3 men who carried the immense burden of deliberating upon a verdict that would forever define the town of Wiley and alter the lives of everyone involved in the tragedy. The jury retired to deliberate, plunging the courthouse and the surrounding community into a tense, agonizing waiting game that lasted for days. The public watched and waited, deeply divided over what the outcome would be, while the national media camped outside the building, broadcasting every rumor and development to an absorbed audience across the country. On October 29, 1980, the deliberations finally concluded, and the courtroom was called back to order to hear the historic decision. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a heavy, suffocating silence as the judge prepared to read the verdict delivered by the jury. When the formal announcement was finally made, declaring that Candy Montgomery had been found not guilty of murder on the grounds of self-defense, the reaction inside the courtroom was instantaneous and volatile. A collective gasp of sheer disbelief echoed through the room, quickly giving way to murmurs of outrage and shock. The jury had accepted the defense's narrative, choosing to believe that the 41 blows of the axe were delivered in self-defense while the defendant was trapped in an uncontrollable dissociative state. Candy Montgomery was a free woman, legally exonerated of the crime, walking away from the courtroom while a storm of controversy and public indignation raged fiercely around her, forever sealing the trial into the darkest annals of American legal history. The delivery of the not guilty verdict on that October afternoon in 1980 did not bring closure to the tragedy that had consumed Wiley, Texas. Instead, it unleashed a tidal wave of profound public outrage and social turbulence that would reverberate for decades. The courtroom, moments after the historic decision was announced, erupted into a volatile mixture of stunned silence and vocal indignation. For the residents of the small town and the broader community who had followed every twist and turn of the sensational trial, the idea that a person could strike another human being 41 times with an axe and walk away a free individual was entirely incomprehensible. Outside the courthouse, as Candy Montgomery stepped out into the bright autumn air, a massive, furious crowd had gathered, their faces etched with anger and disbelief. Demonstrators began shouting hostile accusations, hurling insults, and chanting slogans denouncing the judicial outcome, creating an atmosphere of hostility and raw emotion. They felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal, believing that justice had been profoundly subverted by an elaborate psychological defense that defied common sense and basic human morality. The verdict drove a deep wedge through the community, fracturing friendships, straining local institutions, and leaving an indelible scar on the collective psyche of a town that had once prided itself on its quiet, predictable harmony. For the family and loved ones of Betty Gore, the pain was compounded 1,000-fold, as the legal system's absolution of the killer felt like a secondary, devastating blow that denied Betty the true vindication she deserved in death. In the immediate wake of the trial, the sheer weight of the hostility and the relentless glare of national media attention made it utterly impossible for Candy Montgomery and her family to remain in Wiley. The town that had once been a comfortable sanctuary of familiar faces and supportive church gatherings had transformed into a hostile environment where hostility greeted them at every turn. In an effort to escape the lingering stigma, rebuild their shattered lives, and find a semblance of anonymity, Candy and her husband made the definitive decision to leave Texas entirely. They packed their belongings and relocated far away to the state of Georgia, seeking a fresh start in a new community where their past was entirely unknown. In this unfamiliar setting, Candy sought to reclaim a normal existence, legally reverting to her maiden name, Candy Wheeler, and attempting to distance herself as completely as possible from the sensationalized legacy of the Wiley axe murder. Remarkably, despite the dark shadow of her past and the profound psychological claims that had saved her from a prison sentence, Candy managed to carve out a quiet life in her new home. In a twist of professional irony that continues to boggle the minds of true crime researchers and psychologists alike, she eventually found employment working in the mental health field, specializing in family therapy and counseling. The woman who had successfully argued before a jury that her mind had completely fractured under extreme stress now spent her days advising others on emotional well-being and interpersonal conflict, moving through the world with a quiet, persistent invisibility that stood in stark contrast to the explosive notoriety of her past. The legacy of the Candy Montgomery case extends far beyond the personal trajectories of those directly involved, cementing its place as one of the most controversial and widely analyzed milestones in American legal history. Legal scholars, criminologists, and psychologists have spent decades dissecting the trial, examining the dangerous precedent set by the successful integration of a dissociative fugue state defense into a murder prosecution. The idea that a childhood memory of a mother shushing a 4-year-old could be successfully leveraged to excuse 41 blows of an axe sparked endless debates regarding accountability, the limits of expert psychological testimony, and the sometimes blurry line between legal exoneration and moral justice. Critics of the verdict argue that the legal system failed catastrophically, allowing a calculated killer to manipulate complex psychiatric concepts to evade responsibility, while defenders of the defense strategy maintain that the jury acted conscientiously based on the expert evidence presented before them, recognizing the terrifying, invisible depths of human trauma. The case became a fascinating study in the vulnerability of juries to sophisticated narrative framing, demonstrating how the presentation of a defendant as a sympathetic, repressed suburban housewife could completely overshadow the brutal physical reality of the crime scene. It forced the legal establishment to look deeply at how courts evaluate mental state during violent encounters, leaving a permanent imprint on how similar cases involving psychological dissociation are approached, scrutinized, and debated within the hallowed halls of American jurisprudence. As the years marched forward, the chilling narrative of the Wiley Axe murder gradually transitioned from a contemporary news sensation into a haunting piece of true crime lore, capturing the collective imagination of successive generations through various forms of cultural media. The story possessed all the grim elements required to fascinate the public psyche. The idyllic sunlit setting of a small southern town, the respectable church-going facade hiding dark and illicit secrets, a passionate affair built on suburban boredom, and a climax of unimaginable, bloody violence followed by an astonishing courtroom twist. The case was initially immortalized in the best-selling 1984 nonfiction book Evidence of Love, penned by journalists John Bloom and Jim Atkinson, which provided a comprehensive, deeply reported exploration of the psychological and social dynamics that underpin the tragedy. This literary foundation paved the way for subsequent cinematic and television adaptations, ensuring that the ghosts of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore would continue to haunt the public consciousness. In 1990, the story was brought to the screen as a television film titled A Killing in a Small Town, which adapted the chilling narrative for a broader audience. Decades later, the true crime boom of the 21st century brought a renewed wave of fascination, resulting in the simultaneous release of two high-profile television miniseries in rapid succession. In 2022, Hulu released Candy, starring Jessica Biel in the title role, followed closely in 2023 by HBO's Love and Death, starring Elizabeth Olsen. These modern adaptations brought the intricate details of the case, the claustrophobic tension of the utility room, and the dramatic courtroom theatrics back into the living rooms of millions of viewers across the globe, proving that the morbid curiosity surrounding the human capacity for sudden, devastating violence remains as potent as ever. Ultimately, the enduring significance of the Candy Montgomery case lies not in the sensationalism of the television shows or the complexities of the legal arguments, but in the profound, sobering reminder it offers regarding the fragility of human nature and the terrifying darkness that can dwell just beneath the surface of everyday life. Wiley, Texas, eventually moved past the immediate trauma of 1980, growing from a sleepy rural town into a bustling modern suburb, its older streets paved over and its historical landmarks obscured by modern development. Yet, for those who remember, the name Candy Montgomery remains forever synonymous with an afternoon of incomprehensible horror that shattered a family and left a community forever altered. Betty Gore's memory lives on through the haunting legacy of her tragic death, a poignant reminder of an innocent life cut brutally short by a betrayal she never saw coming and a violence she could not possibly survive. The case serves as an unsettling cautionary tale, compelling us to question the perfection of the facades we build, the hidden pressures we silently carry, and the terrifying proximity of the monster that can emerge when the polite, orderly constructs of civilization give way to primal chaos. It leaves us with a quiet, lingering dread, gazing out across the manicured lawns and smiling faces of our own peaceful neighborhoods, and wondering with a shiver just how well we truly know the people standing right beside us. The legacy of the Candy Montgomery case extends far beyond the legal precedents and the sensationalized true crime television adaptations, forcing a profound, ongoing philosophical re-examination of how modern society perceives guilt, innocence, and the hidden burdens of human existence. When a jury of 9 women and 3 men chose to acquit a woman who had delivered 41 axe blows to her friend, they inadvertently opened a Pandora box of ethical dilemmas that continue to challenge legal philosophers, ethicists, and criminologists alike. The verdict fundamentally tested the boundaries of personal accountability in the face of psychological trauma, establishing a controversial framework where extreme emotional distress and repressed childhood memories could be marshaled to legally justify an act of catastrophic, overwhelming violence. This judicial outcome created a profound fracture in the public conscience, dividing people into two irreconcilable camps. Those who viewed the verdict as a shocking miscarriage of justice that allowed a calculating killer to manipulate the legal system, and those who saw it as a harrowing testament to the terrifying, invisible fragility of the human mind when subjected to unbearable, prolonged pressure. The echoes of this societal division still resonate today, serving as a constant touchstone in discussions concerning the reliability of recovered memories, the limits of psychiatric expert testimony in criminal defense, and the delicate, often blurry lines separating a cold-blooded murderer from a psychological victim of circumstance. To truly grasp the enduring weight of this tragedy, one must look beyond the courtroom theatrics and examine the profound systemic failures that allowed such an explosive undercurrent of quiet desperation to fester within a community explicitly designed to provide mutual support and spiritual sanctuary. Wiley, Texas, in the late 1970s, functioned as an ideological bubble, a tightly regulated ecosystem where nonconformity was subtly punished, emotional vulnerabilities were swept under the rug, and the projection of domestic perfection was treated as a moral imperative. In such an environment, individuals like Betty Gore, who wrestled with severe postpartum depression, and Candy Montgomery, who choked on the suffocating monotony of suburban domesticity, had very few safe, socially acceptable outlets to voice their genuine struggles. Mental health resources were heavily stigmatized. Professional psychological counseling was often viewed as a failure of faith or character, and personal grievances were expected to be swallowed quietly behind closed doors. This cultural suppression created a volatile pressure cooker effect, where hidden resentments, unfulfilled emotional needs, and silent desperation multiplied in the dark until they inevitably collided in a burst of horrific, uncontainable violence. The tragedy was not merely the result of a single illicit affair or a momentary loss of control, but the catastrophic culmination of a rigid social structure that systematically ignored the complex, messy realities of the human condition in favor of a polished, unyielding facade of cheerful conformity. Moreover, the case offers an unsettling mirror to the ways in which society constructs gender expectations and evaluates violent behavior based on outward appearances and social standing. Candy Montgomery possessed every demographic and social advantage needed to present herself as the ultimate sympathetic figure. She was an articulate, polite, church-going white suburban housewife whose gentle demeanor and active community involvement made it nearly impossible for many people to initially visualize her as a physical threat. Her defense team brilliantly weaponized these very social expectations, framing her as a fragile, victimized mother whose violent outburst was entirely out of character, an accidental aberration driven by a neurological short-circuit rather than malice or intent. Conversely, Betty Gore, despite being the victim who lost her life in her own home while defending herself, was frequently subjected to a subtle, retrospective character scrutiny by defense strategies that sought to paint her as the initial aggressor, portraying her as rigid, anxious, and deeply troubled. This dynamic exposes a deeply troubling bias within the cultural processing of true crime, where the aesthetic of respectability can heavily influence public sympathy and legal outcomes. The public outrage that followed the verdict was fueled not only by the sheer brutality of the 41 Act's blows, but by a lingering, deeply uncomfortable realization that a person who looks, speaks, and acts like a pillar of the community can commit an unspeakable atrocity and subsequently be absolved by the very institutions built to protect that exact social class. The psychological footprint of the Wiley tragedy also invites a sobering reflection on the nature of friendship, trust, and the terrifying opacity of the human heart in our contemporary world. In the hyper-connected yet socially isolated landscape of modern suburbia, people live in close physical proximity to one another, sharing neighborhood streets, school drop-off zones, and community events, yet they often remain complete strangers to the inner emotional turmoil unfolding behind closed doors. The friendship between Betty Gore and Candy Montgomery was built on a foundation of shared domestic routines, church hymns, and coffee dates, yet it was simultaneously poisoned by deception, secret betrayals, and unexpressed resentments that neither woman fully communicated until it was far too late. It serves as a grim reminder that human beings are remarkably adept at wearing masks, concealing their deepest fears, darkest impulses, and and most destructive mistakes behind warm smiles and pleasant conversation. When we look at our neighbors, our colleagues, or even our closest confidants, we are often only seeing the carefully curated projection they wish to present to the world. The realization that a trusted friend who volunteers in the church choir and organizes playdates for children could suddenly find herself locked in a mortal, axe-wielding struggle with her companion shatters the comforting illusion that safety can be guaranteed by the mere respectability of our social circles. It forces us to confront the reality that darkness does not always announce itself in shadows, but can sometimes wear the familiar, friendly face of the person standing right next to us in the grocery store aisle or the church pew. As decades have passed, and the physical landscape of Wiley has transformed from a sleepy rural outpost into a bustling, modernized expanse of the greater Dallas metropolitan area, the ghosts of 1980 have slowly receded into the realm of local folklore and true crime history. Yet their underlying warning remains as urgent and potent as ever. The older homes have been renovated or replaced, the dirt roads paved over, and the population has swelled with newcomers who know nothing of the blood spilled on a quiet summer morning in a suburban utility room. Yet, the story persists, migrating from court transcripts and yellowed newspaper clippings into best-selling books and high-budget television miniseries, because it touches upon universal fears that transcend time and geography. It challenges our faith in justice, tests our understanding of psychological trauma, and exposes the dangerous fragility of the social contracts we rely upon to maintain order in our daily lives. The memory of Betty Gore, cut down in the prime of her life while fighting a silent battle against her own mind and a profound betrayal by those she trusted, remains a poignant symbol of the innocent lives caught in the crossfire of human weakness and unbridled passion. Meanwhile, Candy Montgomery stands as an enigmatic, haunting figure in criminal lore, a woman who walked through the fire of an unprecedented trial, secured her freedom against all logical odds, and vanished into the quiet anonymity of a new life, leaving behind a legacy of eternal controversy. Ultimately, studying the full arc of this astonishing true crime saga leaves us not with easy answers or satisfying moral resolutions, but with a lingering, profound disquiet that stays long after the final page is turned or the screen fades to black. It compels us to look inward at our own relationships, to evaluate the honesty of the facades we maintain, and to recognize the vital importance of fostering genuine, empathetic connections that can withstand the heavy pressures of everyday existence before they reach a breaking point. The Wiley axe murder remains an enduring testament to the fact that the most terrifying monsters do not live in fairy tales or dark cinematic fiction, but can occasionally emerge from the very heart of the ordinary, sunlit world we build for ourselves. It is a stark, unyielding reminder that beneath the manicured lawns, the polite waves, and the tranquil rhythm of suburban life, the human psyche is an unpredictable, unfathomable abyss, capable of shifting from profound peace to unspeakable violence in the space of a single heartbeat. As we navigate our own lives among the quiet streets and familiar faces of our communities, this historic tragedy whispers a timeless, chilling caution about the hidden depths of human nature, urging us to never take for granted the fragile safety of the world we think we know so well. The final chapter of the Candy Montgomery story is not written in the legal briefs of attorneys or the dramatic scripts of television adaptations, but rather in the quiet, lingering echoes that continue to haunt the collective conscience of anyone who examines the case. When the courtroom doors swung open in 1980 and the verdict of acquittal was read, it did not draw a definitive curtain over the tragedy. Instead, it left an open wound in the fabric of American jurisprudence and cultural memory. The sheer peculiarity of a 41-strike axe attack resulting in a legal declaration of self-defense based on a momentary psychological blackout remains a staggering anomaly, a historical puzzle that defies neat categorization. It challenges our fundamental understanding of justice, forcing us to reconcile the brutal physical reality of a slaughtered human life with the abstract, invisible complexities of a mind pushed past its breaking point. For criminologists and legal scholars, the case stands as a permanent cautionary tale about the immense power of narrative framing in a courtroom setting, demonstrating how an exceptional legal team could successfully persuade a jury to look past mountains of physical evidence in favor of a deeply sympathetic, albeit profoundly controversial, psychological explanation. It remains a stark reminder that the legal system, composed of fallible human beings, is entirely susceptible to the dramatic currents of empathy, fear, and psychological defense mechanisms, leaving a legacy that will be debated in law schools and classrooms for generations to come. Beyond the sterile arguments of legal precedent and courtroom strategy, the human element of this tragedy remains its most haunting and indelible aspect. Betty Gore's life was extinguished in a manner so violent and intimate that it defies human comprehension. Yet her memory is often overshadowed by the sheer theatricality of the trial and the subsequent media circus. History risks reducing her to a mere plot point in a true crime narrative, a tragic victim defined entirely by the gruesome manner of her death, rather than the vibrant, complex, and feeling person she was during her time on Earth. She was a dedicated educator who found joy and purpose in her classroom, a mother desperately trying to nurture her children despite the heavy, suffocating fog of postpartum depression, and a woman who sought nothing more than honesty and stability in a world that felt increasingly overwhelming. Her final moments, spent in her own home, facing a devastating betrayal by those she trusted most, represent a profound violation of the sanctity of domestic life. The fact that she was denied full vindication in the eyes of the law adds a layer of bitter injustice to her legacy, ensuring that her name will forever be linked with a violent outcome she did not deserve and could not possibly prevent. Remembering Betty not merely as a victim of a sensational crime, but as a real human being who fought a courageous, quiet battle for her own happiness, is essential to honoring the true weight of what happened on that fateful summer morning. At the same time, the figure of Candy Montgomery remains an enigma of psychological survival and social reinvention, a woman who walked through the fire of global condemnation and managed to forge a quiet, invisible existence on the other side. The trajectory of her life after the trial, leaving behind the hostile echoes of Texas, changing her name, relocating to Georgia, and building a new career in mental health counseling, reads like a fictional twist designed to test the limits of human irony. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about human adaptability and the capacity for societal rehabilitation, even in the wake of acts that defy conventional morality. Whether one views her as a calculating killer who manipulated the justice system or as a deeply traumatized individual who genuinely experienced a terrifying dissociative fugue, her ability to reintegrate into society and counsel others on emotional well-being highlights the strange, often contradictory nature of human psychology. She represents the ultimate embodiment of the suburban mask, a person capable of seamlessly navigating the contrasting worlds of church choirs and brutal violence, community volunteerism, and hidden desperation. Her survival and subsequent anonymity serve as a lingering testament to the fact that people can experience the most catastrophic, life-altering tempests and yet somehow emerge on the other side, carrying their secrets into a quiet, ordinary future while the world around them continues to debate the truth of their actions. The enduring fascination with the wily axe murder across decades of changing media landscapes reveals a deep, underlying cultural obsession with the darkness that festers just beneath the surface of everyday life. From the pioneering pages of early true crime literature to the high-budget streaming miniseries of the modern era, the story continues to captivate audiences because it taps into our most primal fears. We live in a society that places an immense premium on outward appearances, expecting our homes to be pristine, our marriages to be happy, and our communities to be safe havens of predictable harmony. Yet, beneath these carefully manicured lawns and polite suburban smiles, human beings are navigating complex, messy, and often volatile emotions. The story of Candy and Betty reminds us that the distance between a peaceful neighborhood barbecue and an unimaginable scene of carnage is terrifyingly short. It shatters the comforting illusion that we can protect ourselves from horror simply by surrounding ourselves with respectable people, attending the right churches, and living in quiet, orderly towns. The monster, as this case chillingly illustrates, does not always hide in the dark alleys of a dangerous metropolis. Sometimes, it wears the friendly face of a neighbor, carries a casserole to a potluck, and sings hymns in the church choir on Sunday morning. waiting for the precise moment when the pressure of unexpressed truths causes the facade to fracture completely. As we look back on the events of 1980 from the vantage point of the modern world, the lessons of the Wiley tragedy feel more relevant and urgent than ever. It serves as a powerful reminder of the vital importance of open communication, empathetic mental health support, and the dismantling of the rigid social expectations that force people to suffer in silence behind closed doors. If Betty Gore had found a community that truly understood and supported her through her postpartum depression without judgment, or if Candy Montgomery had possessed a safe, honest outlet for her marital ennui and restless energy before it spiraled into deception, the catastrophic collision course might have been averted entirely. The tragedy underscores the danger of allowing small resentments and hidden secrets to accumulate in the dark, acting as silent explosives that can be detonated by something as simple as a misplaced word or a quiet shushing sound. It calls upon us to look beyond the superficial perfection of the lives presented to us, to foster genuine, vulnerable connections with the people in our lives, and to recognize that true safety comes not from enforced conformity, but from honest, compassionate understanding of the complex, fragile human hearts beating all around us. Ultimately, the story of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore is a profound meditation on the unfathomable depths of the human psyche and the enduring echoes of choices made in the heat of a single, catastrophic moment. It leaves us with a quiet, lingering disquiet, reminding us that history is not merely a collection of dates and legal outcomes, but a living, breathing tapestry of human pain, ambition, fear, and survival. As the physical landmarks of old Wiley fade into the background of modern urban expansion, the ghostly resonance of that summer morning remains, whispering a timeless warning across the decades. It challenges us to remain vigilant, not merely against external threats, but against the silent, internal pressures that can silently build within our own lives and communities. It urges us to walk through the world with our eyes open, recognizing the profound responsibility we share in supporting one another through the darkest valleys of human experience. And above all, it leaves us staring out across the quiet, familiar streets of our own neighborhoods with a renewed, sobering awareness of just how fragile our peace truly is, and how deeply we must strive to understand the hidden depths of the people we call our friends. The passage of time has a unique way of softening the sharpest edges of history, transforming visceral, blood-soaked realities into distant folklore. Yet some tragedies refuse to be buried quietly beneath the shifting sands of progress. In the decades that have followed the fateful summer morning of 1980, the physical landscape of Wiley, Texas, has undergone an extraordinary metamorphosis, shedding its sleepy, isolated rural identity to become a bustling, modern extension of the greater Dallas metropolitan sprawl. The older dirt roads have long since been paved over with smooth, anonymous asphalt. The open fields where neighborhood children once played have been swallowed up by endless rows of identical housing developments, and the quiet cul-de-sacs have grown crowded with the frantic, hurried traffic of a new generation of families who know nothing of the blood that once soaked a utility room floor. Yet, despite this sweeping modernization, the invisible ghost of that single catastrophic day continues to linger over the town like a persistent shroud, woven into the oral history and collective memory of those who lived through the trauma. For the long-term residents of Wiley, the name Candy Montgomery is not merely a footnote in a true crime anthology or the subject of a streaming television series. It remains a vivid, unsettling reminder of the afternoon their peaceful community was abruptly unmasked, exposing the terrifying volatility that can fester when the rigid, unyielding demands of suburban perfection collide with the raw, chaotic impulses of the human heart. To dwell upon this case is to confront the deeply uncomfortable reality of why humanity remains perpetually obsessed with the macabre, drawn inexorably toward the dark narratives that disrupt our comforting illusions of safety. True crime stories like the Wiley axe murder serve as a grim mirror, reflecting our secret fears that the orderly, civilized world we painstakingly construct around ourselves is entirely fragile, held together by nothing more than fragile social contracts and polite conventions. We are captivated by the stark contrast between the bright, sunlit veneer of suburban normalcy and the unfathomable violence lurking just beneath the surface, because it forces us to question the absolute nature of the people we share our daily lives with. When a woman who sings in the church choir, organizes bake sales, and greets her neighbors with a warm, cheerful smile can suddenly find herself locked in a mortal 41-strike struggle with her friend, it shatters the foundational belief that safety can be guaranteed by environment, status, or morality. It reminds us that darkness does not always wear a menacing disguise or lurk in the shadows of dangerous urban alleyways. Sometimes, it wears a familiar face, speaks in a gentle voice, and participates fully in the mundane rituals of community life until the hidden pressures become too great to bear, causing the entire facade to fracture into irreparable pieces. The enduring resonance of the trial and its controversial verdict also forces a profound, ongoing interrogation of the legal system and its capacity to truly understand the labyrinthine depths of the human mind under extreme distress. The decision of a jury to accept a defense built upon a temporary dissociative state, triggered by a childhood memory of a mother shushing a 4-year-old child, remains one of the most polarizing milestones in modern jurisprudence. It established a dangerous, fascinating precedent that continues to challenge legal scholars, ethicists, and criminologists who grapple with the delicate balance between personal accountability and psychological trauma. The case serves as an enduring masterclass in narrative framing, illustrating how an exceptional legal team can successfully persuade a jury to look past the overwhelming physical brutality of 41 axe blows by recasting a calculated killer as a sympathetic, profoundly repressed victim of her own subconscious mind. This tension between legal exoneration and moral justice leaves a permanent scar on the collective conscience, reminding us that the courts are ultimately operated by fallible human beings who are just as susceptible to the powerful currents of empathy, dramatic storytelling, and the terrifying mysteries of psychological defense mechanisms as anyone else. Yet, amidst the complex legal debates, the brilliant courtroom theatrics, and the sensationalized true crime media adaptations that have preserved the story across generations, it is vital to remember the real human cost that anchors the entire narrative in profound sorrow. Betty Gore was not merely a plot device, a tragic victim designed to drive a compelling mystery, or a distant historical figure. She was a real, feeling human being who deserved a full, vibrant life that was brutally and unjustly cut short. She was an educator who found purpose in her classroom, a mother fighting a valiant, exhausting, and largely unsupported battle against the heavy, suffocating fog of severe postpartum depression, and a woman who simply sought honesty, stability, and genuine connection in a world that often demanded a superficial performance of perpetual happiness. Her final moments, spent facing a devastating betrayal by those she trusted most and fighting desperately for her survival in her own home, represent a profound violation of the sanctity of human life. The fact that she was denied ultimate vindication in the eyes of the law adds a heartbreaking layer of injustice to her legacy, making it all the more imperative that history remembers her not for the gruesome manner of her death, but for the quiet, courageous dignity with which she navigated her struggles while she was here. On the other side of this tragic equation stands Candy Montgomery, an enigmatic and haunting figure who managed to survive the global firestorm of condemnation, secure her freedom against all logical odds, and quietly vanish into the anonymous horizon of a new life. Her ability to shed the toxic notoriety of Texas, relocate to Georgia, legally reclaim her maiden name, and carve out a peaceful existence working in the delicate field of mental health counseling reads like a psychological thriller that defies all conventional understanding of morality and consequence. Whether one perceives her as a calculating perpetrator who masterfully manipulated the justice system, or as a deeply traumatized individual who genuinely experienced a terrifying, uncontrollable break from reality, her trajectory highlights the bizarre, often contradictory resilience of the human spirit. She walked through the absolute furnace of public outrage and social ostracization, carrying her secrets into the quiet shadows, and emerged on the other side as a testament to the fact that people can experience the most catastrophic tempests imaginable and yet somehow find a way to rebuild an ordinary, functioning future, leaving the rest of the world to endlessly debate the true nature of their actions. As this exhaustive exploration of the Wiley Axe murder draws to its natural close, the narrative leaves us not with easy answers, comforting resolutions, or moral tidy endings, but with a deep, lingering disquiet that settles quietly into the mind. It is a story that compels us to look inward at our own relationships, to examine the honesty of the emotional facades we maintain in our daily lives, and to recognize the vital, life-saving importance of fostering genuine, compassionate connections before the silent, accumulating pressures of human existence reach a breaking point. The tragedy serves as a timeless, unyielding reminder that the human psyche is an unfathomable abyss, capable of shifting from serene peace to devastating violence in the space of a single heartbeat when driven by the heavy weight of unexpressed truths, hidden resentments, and desperate survival instincts. It calls upon us to walk through our neighborhoods with our eyes wide open, holding a deep, respectful awareness of the invisible battles being fought behind closed doors, and refusing to take for granted the fragile safety and predictable harmony of the world we think we know so well. The echoes of 1980 will forever whisper through the history of true crime, a chilling monument to a moment in time when the bright, sunlit promise of suburban life was violently eclipsed by a storm of incomprehensible horror. It challenges us to remain vigilant, not merely against external threats, but against the silent, internal pressures that can quietly accumulate within our own communities and our own hearts. It urges us to cherish the people we love, to communicate with honesty and vulnerability, and to honor the memory of those who were lost by striving always to understand the profound, complex depths of the human experience. As the final notes of this dark and compelling chapter fade away, we are left standing quietly in the ordinary light of our own present moments, gazing out across the familiar streets and looking into the faces of the people we call our friends, carrying with us a quiet, sober realization of just how deeply we must care for one another in a world where the line between peace and chaos is always dangerously, beautifully thin. The journey through the dark, labyrinthine corridors of the Candy Montgomery case ultimately brings us to a profound and unsettling stillness, the kind of quiet that settles over a landscape long after a violent storm has passed and cleared the heavy summer air from the Texas plains. When we strip away the sensational headlines, the intense media scrutiny, the brilliant legal maneuverings, and the competing narratives of self-defense versus calculated murder, we are left with a fundamental human truth about the nature of existence and the fragile boundaries that govern our daily lives. History often attempts to categorize events into neat, digestible boxes, assigning clear labels of villain and victim, guilt and innocence, right and wrong, as if the human experience could ever be reduced to such simple binaries. Yet the tragedy that unfolded in that sunlit utility room in Wiley resists such easy compartmentalization, forcing us instead to gaze directly into the gray, murky depths where human psychology, trauma, social pressure, and unexpected violence tragically collide. It reminds us that lives are rarely defined by a single catastrophic moment, but rather by the accumulated weights of quiet expectations, unexpressed fears, and hidden longings that build silently over years until they find an outlet, whether in the form of a devastating betrayal, a desperate struggle for survival, or an act of incomprehensible destruction. We are left to ponder how seamlessly the extraordinary can erupt within the ordinary, shattering the peace of a quiet morning without warning and leaving an eternal scar upon the collective human conscience. It is a haunting testament to the unpredictable nature of human emotion, showing how easily the veneer of civilization can tear away when pressure reaches its absolute limit. Consider once more the quiet, unassuming suburban landscape of Wiley as it existed in the summer of 1980, a place designed to look and feel like a sanctuary from the chaotic noise of the wider world. The families who settled there were seeking an anchor, a predictable rhythm rooted in traditional values, communal faith, and the comforting assurance that if you played by the rules, followed the social script, and maintained a polite, cheerful exterior, safety and happiness would naturally follow. Yet this very insistence on perfection, this cultural demand for an unblemished facade, acted as a silent incubator for isolation and desperation. Betty Gore and Candy Montgomery were both products of this environment, trapped in their own distinct ways by the invisible cages of domestic expectation. Betty fought a valiant, lonely battle against the suffocating fog of postpartum depression, yearning for reassurance and stability in a marriage strained by distance. While Candy choked on the profound monotony of a life that was peaceful on the surface, but devoid of the passion and excitement she secretly craved. Their paths, intertwined through church hymns and neighborhood playdates, became a tragic collision course because neither woman had access to a safe, non-judgmental space where they could voice their true, messy emotional realities without fear of social judgment or ostracization. The catastrophe that ultimately erupted between them was not merely a random glitch in an otherwise perfect world, but the explosive manifestation of systemic pressures that had been quietly compounding in the dark for months, waiting for a single spark to ignite an unforgettable fire that would forever alter the history of their tight-knit community. And then there is the trial itself, that extraordinary legal theater that forever etched the name of Candy Montgomery into the annals of American jurisprudence and cultural lore. The decision of a jury to accept the defense of a dissociative fugue state triggered by a childhood memory of a mother's silencing shush remains a monumental, deeply controversial watershed moment. It forces us to confront the terrifying adaptability of the human mind, showcasing how quickly consciousness can shatter under extreme stress, retreating inward as a desperate defense mechanism while the body acts out a primal, unstoppable script of survival. Whether one views that psychological explanation as a brilliant legal defense or a masterclass in manipulation, it leaves us with an unsettling philosophical question regarding accountability and the limits of human understanding. How do we judge an act of such immense violence when the person committing it may have been entirely disconnected from their own conscious awareness at the very moment the blows were struck? The legal system chose to grant exoneration based on self-defense and psychological trauma, but the court of public opinion delivered a completely opposite verdict, one rooted in the visceral horror of 41 axe wounds and the undeniable reality of a life extinguished. This eternal tension between legal absolution and moral justice ensures that the case will continue to fascinate, disturb, and divide observers for generations to come, serving as an inexhaustible case study in the darkness that can dwell within the human heart when reason fails and psychological trauma takes absolute control over the physical body, leaving behind a legacy of profound legal and ethical debate that remains entirely unresolved. As the decades have marched onward, the physical world of Wiley has transformed beyond recognition, swallowing up the old landmarks and paving over the historic spaces with the relentless expansion of modern suburban sprawl. The dirt roads are gone, the quiet rural horizon has been replaced by endless neighborhoods of contemporary homes, and a brand new generation of residents lives out their daily routines in complete ignorance of the blood that once soaked suburban floorboards on a Friday morning in June. Yet, despite this thorough modernization, the ghost of that tragic day refuses to be completely erased. It lives on in the collective memory of true crime history, preserved through books, television series, and endless retellings that probe the darkest corners of human behavior. It reminds us that history is not just a passive collection of dates and legal briefs, but a living, breathing testament to human pain, survival, and the enduring consequences of choices made in the heat of a single, catastrophic moment. Betty Gore remains a poignant, tragic symbol of an innocent life cut brutally short, a woman whose memory deserves to be honored not merely through the lens of her gruesome death, but through the courage with which she fought her silent battles. Candy Montgomery remains an enigmatic, haunting figure who managed to navigate the fiercest storm of public condemnation and find a quiet, invisible anonymity on the other side, a living testament to the strange, resilient capacity of individuals to rebuild ordinary lives after surviving the unthinkable storms of public scandal and personal ruin, carrying their deepest secrets into a quiet future while the rest of the world continues to debate the true nature of their actions across changing generations. Bringing this exhaustive exploration to its final close, we are left not with tidy resolutions or comforting answers, but with a quiet, profound awareness of the fragility that defines our everyday existence. The story of Candy and Betty is ultimately a mirror held up to human nature, urging us to look past the polished surfaces of the lives we see around us and recognize the vital importance of genuine, empathetic connection. It calls upon us to dismantle the rigid social expectations that force people to suffer in silence, to foster honesty and vulnerability in our relationships, and to understand that true safety comes not from enforced conformity or pristine outward appearances, but from compassionate, open communication that can help carry the heavy burdens of life before they reach a breaking point. When we walk through our neighborhoods, greet our neighbors, and participate in our communities, this historic tragedy whispers a timeless, sobering caution. It reminds us that the lines separating peace from chaos, order from destruction, and normalcy from horror is always dangerously, beautifully thin. It challenges us to remain vigilant against the silent, internal pressures that can build within our own hearts, urging us to care deeply and listen closely to one another as we navigate the complex, often unpredictable valleys of the human experience. As the final echoes of this dark and compelling saga fade away into the quiet light of the present moment, we are left standing with a renewed reverence for the profound responsibility we share in protecting one another, holding fast to the understanding that beneath the ordinary, sunlit surface of our lives, the human heart is a vast, unfathomable depth that demands our utmost compassion, our deepest honesty, and our eternal, watchful care. The evolution of true crime storytelling in contemporary media has fundamentally transformed how historical tragedies are preserved, analyzed, and consumed by a global audience that increasingly demands not just the dry, factual recounting of a case, but an intimate, microscopic look into the psychological abyss of everyone involved. When we examine the vast cultural landscape that has grown around the Wiley axe murder, we bear witness to a fascinating sociological phenomenon where a localized tragedy from a small Texas town becomes a universal canvas for exploring the darkest, most unfathomable complexities of human behavior. This enduring fascination is not driven merely by a morbid appetite for violence or cheap shock value, but by a deeper, more profound search for existential understanding. We are relentlessly drawn to stories like that of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore because they challenge our most deeply held assumptions about safety, morality, and the predictability of our social environments. In a modern world defined by rapid technological change, suburban expansion, and hyperconnectivity, people often feel increasingly isolated within their own communities, leading to a quiet, pervasive anxiety about the hidden realities of those living right next door. The true crime genre acts as a dark mirror, reflecting our secret fears that the orderly, civilized constructs we rely upon to maintain peace are perilously thin, capable of shattering at any moment under the accumulated weight of unexpressed emotions, unspoken resentments, and hidden betrayals. Furthermore, the accessibility of archives, trial transcripts, and investigative journalism allows modern audiences to dissect every single piece of evidence with unprecedented scrutiny, turning historical legal battles into ongoing community debates that transcend generations and geographic boundaries, anchoring these dark narratives permanently and indelibly within the global cultural consciousness. This cultural obsession places a heavy ethical responsibility on storytellers, journalists, and historians who attempt to reconstruct these complex events for public consumption with honesty, rigor, and profound care. Navigating the delicate balance between sensationalism and respectful truth-seeking requires an unwavering commitment to depth, empathy, and psychological nuance. When a historical tragedy is adapted into books, television miniseries, or investigative podcasts, there is an inherent temptation to dramatize, to streamline complex human motivations into neat narrative tropes, and to elevate certain figures while reducing others to one-dimensional archetypes. Yet the true weight of the Wiley case lies precisely in its stubborn resistance to such easy categorizations. Neither Candy Montgomery nor Betty Gore can be accurately reduced to a simple caricature of pure evil or immaculate victimhood. They were real, complex women shaped by the social constraints, expectations, and unspoken pressures of their era, navigating deeply flawed emotional landscapes with the limited tools they had at their disposal. To honor their history and respect the profound sorrow of their families requires looking past the sensationalism of the 41 axe blows and the dramatic courtroom theatrics, seeking instead to understand the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed such a catastrophe to occur in the first place. It requires us to acknowledge that human beings are capable of immense tenderness and terrifying brutality, sometimes existing within the very same person under different circumstances of extreme pressure and psychological distress. This analytical approach challenges us to look beyond immediate outrage and examine the broader environmental and psychological factors that shape human tragedy, ensuring that the historical lessons imparted by the past are never lost to superficial entertainment. The psychological legacy of the trial itself continues to cast a long, influential shadow over modern legal theory and public discourse surrounding criminal accountability and justice. The integration of a dissociative fugue state defense into a murder prosecution broke new ground in how courts evaluate mental state during violent encounters, establishing a controversial precedent that invites ongoing debate among legal scholars, ethicists, and mental health professionals. By introducing the concept of a repressed childhood trauma being triggered by a minor sensory input to cause a temporary loss of conscious control, the defense shifted the narrative from one of calculated malice to one of involuntary psychological survival. This paradigm shift forces society to wrestle with uncomfortable questions regarding free will, culpability, and the extent to which a person can be held morally or legally responsible for actions committed while entirely disconnected from reality. While the legal system ultimately delivered an acquittal based on self-defense and psychological trauma, the lingering public skepticism highlights a profound disconnect between formal legal outcomes and the intuitive moral compass of society. People look at the sheer physical reality of the crime scene, the relentless repetition of the act's strikes, and find it nearly impossible to reconcile such visceral destruction with a declaration of innocence. This perpetual tension ensures that the trial remains an essential touchstone in discussions concerning the limits of psychiatric expert testimony, the reliability of recovered memories, and the ongoing struggle to define justice in cases where the human mind shatters under the crushing weight of invisible pain. As forensic psychology and neuroscience continue to advance, the debates sparked by the wily courtroom continue to evolve, influencing how modern jurisprudence evaluates claims of temporary insanity and psychological dissociation in violent criminal cases. As we step back and view the entirety of this dark chapter from the vantage point of the modern era, the narrative ultimately transforms from a localized historical curiosity into a timeless, universal meditation on the fragility of human existence and social order. The physical landmarks of Old Wiley have long since vanished, swallowed by the relentless march of suburban development and modern progress. But the invisible echoes of that summer morning remain eternally vibrant. They remind us that the most profound dangers we face are often not the external threats lurking in the dark shadows of unfamiliar places, but the internal pressures that quietly accumulate within our own hearts and our own communities when we fail to communicate honestly, support one another compassionately, and dismantle the rigid social expectations that force people to suffer in silence behind closed doors. The story of Candy and Betty stands as a solemn, unyielding monument to the importance of genuine human connection, urging us to look beyond the polished facades of the lives we encounter every day and recognize the vital need for empathy, understanding, and emotional safety. It challenges us to remain vigilant against the silent accumulation of resentment and despair, fostering environments where people can voice their struggles without fear of judgment or ostracization long before a breaking point is ever reached. By remembering the profound tragedy that unfolded in that quiet Texas town, we keep alive a vital cautionary tale about the unpredictable nature of human emotion and the absolute necessity of fostering true, compassionate communities that can weather the heaviest storms of existence. Bringing this comprehensive exploration to its ultimate, quiet conclusion, we are left not with easy resolutions or comforting answers, but with a profound, lingering awareness of the complex depths that define the human experience. The journey through the Candy Montgomery case has taken us from the sunlit streets of a quiet Texas town through the tense, dramatic corridors of a historic courtroom and deep into the labyrinthine mysteries of the human psyche, revealing a landscape characterized by both astonishing vulnerability and terrifying power. We carry forward with us a renewed reverence for the delicate balance of our daily lives, holding fast to the understanding that peace and chaos are separated by a line far thinner than we often care to admit. As the final echoes of this dark and compelling saga fade away into the quiet light of our own present moments, We are left standing with our eyes open and our hearts attentive, recognizing the profound responsibility we share in caring for one another, listening closely to the unspoken cries of those around us, and striving always to build a world rooted not in enforced perfection or superficial conformity, but in radical honesty, deep compassion, and an enduring, watchful grace that protects us from the shadows within. The legacy of Wiley remains a permanent, haunting reminder of what happens when the human heart reaches its absolute breaking point, urging us forevermore to look deeper, care more deeply, and cherish the fragile peace we share in this fleeting life together.